These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The hidden history of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at hartmanreport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Tyranny, From Plato to Trump, Fools, Sycophants, and Citizens by Andrew Fiala. This is from the preface. It starts out with a quote from Mary Wollstonecraft from her book, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Quote, "Tyrants would have cause to tremble if reason were to become the rule of duty." We recently witnessed the failure of a would-be tyrant who attempted to subvert the rule of law and overturn the result of a democratic election. The American system was pushed toward a cliff, but constitutional guardrails slowed things down. Conscientious people pumped the brakes, and the system held. This was a lesson of tyranny averted. We should take stock and learn what worked and what needs improvement in our system and in our souls. And while the American crisis of 2020-2021 was frightening, a broader historical perspective helps. The threat of tyranny is common, but the cure is well known. It involves virtuous citizenship and a stable constitution. The tyrant's rise and fall is an old story. Consider, a plague descended on the nation as the tyrant ranted and raved, refusing to admit that he was the cause of the nation's ills. The tyrant lived in a fantasy world of his own creation. He refused to accept what was said by those who spoke truth to power. Instead, he listened only to those who flattered his ego and encouraged him in his delusions. The nation suffered profoundly under the tyrant and his plague. He tried to blame the plague on some other scapegoat. Members of the public were seduced by the tyrant and his sycophants to sacrifice everything on behalf of a lie. Violence erupted. When the awful truth was finally revealed, the chorus reached a tragic conclusion. Our lives were mere shadows, and then there's a block of poetry here. Our lives were mere shadows, happiness fades away to nothing. The tyrant's fall reminds us that no human creation lasts forever. Plague and trouble make victims of us all. This is from Oedipus, the Tyrant, lines 1190. This is the story of Oedipus. It is also the story of Donald Trump. The players in this tragedy are found throughout history. They are the tyrant, his sycophants, and the moronic masses. The tyrant rages, the sycophants simper, the masses cheer and howl, fight and die. As the plague spreads, good things fall apart and decency suffers. This tragedy brings with it the risk of despair. The good news is that the cure for this disease is well known. It is, as Mary Wollstonecraft suggested, reason. Life in general must be made reasonable. This means we need a reasonable constitution as well as wise and virtuous citizens. Wisdom and virtue work together to prevent tyranny. Plato and Aristotle knew this, as did John Adams. Adams wrote in his diary when he was Vice President of the United States, quote, "Tyranny can scarcely be practiced upon a virtuous and wise people." But wisdom, virtue, and reason are often lacking. Wollstonecraft, I've got my Marys wrong. This is Wollstonecraft, I'm sorry. Wollstonecraft laments the fact that, quote, "tyranny in whatever part of society it rears its brazen front will ever undermine morality." Tyranny is not only a political problem, it is also a moral and spiritual one. It afflicts our souls as well as churches, businesses, and family life. Wollstonecraft's important contribution was to argue that for the liberation of women in an era when women were oppressed by the tyranny of patriarchal families. Wollstonecraft was a contemporary of Thomas Jefferson and other thinkers of the 18th century Enlightenment. Despite their claims to enlightenment, the heroes of this tradition suffered from moral blindness, as we all do. Jefferson's words inspired a revolution against the tyrant King George III. The words inscribed in the Jefferson Memorial state, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." But Jefferson owned slaves, one of the more obvious forms of tyranny in the world. We must all be careful of our blind spots. Reason aims to shed light by holding up a mirror. The remedy for tyranny is philosophical self-examination. This is an ongoing process, not a panacea. Each generation must seek to make progress on their path to enlightenment. The good news is that we have made progress. Women were liberated and slavery was abolished. The idea that wisdom and virtue can cure tyranny predates the Enlightenment by over 2,000 years. It was the solution proposed by the ancient Greeks, who gave us the very language we will employ here. Words such as tyranny, sycophancy, democracy, and political philosophy. The Greeks emphasized the need for virtue among the players in the political drama. Modern thinkers built upon this and emphasized the need for a rational system of government that prevents tyranny. Tragedy is avoided when leaders and citizens are virtuous and when a stable constitutional system guarantees individual rights, divides power, and creates checks and balances. We have known the cure for thousands of years, but the disease is genetic. Every generation or so, the conditions conspire to bring together an ugly cast of characters that includes the tyrant, his sycophants, and the moronic fools who cheer him on. The book, Tyranny from Plato to Trump.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. A lot on our program today. Just you and me, no guests today, but we've got a lot to talk about. I want to start out with the myth of the lone wolf shooter. We'll get to that in just a moment. And Elise Stefanik, the Republican caucus chairwoman, and other Republicans have been pushing this replacement theory that seems to have inspired this murderous terrorist. In our second hour, I want to get into my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com, which also touches on this topic. It's why those people who want to destroy America always first go after trust, societal trust, trust in each other, trust, period. And was Trump stealing top secret documents for profits? Some interesting speculation from a former FBI agent. And also in our second hour, geeky science. They think they may have found one of the clues to what's causing long COVID, and it may have something to do with our guts. we'll get to that in the second hour. In the third hour, on this day in history, George Wallace won the Michigan Democratic primary. There's more to the story, and I'll tell you about that in the third hour. Also, we'll get into an update on the Russia-Ukraine crisis in our third hour. So, a lot to talk about. I want to start out with this whole idea that, lone shooters. I don't recall who it was, but somebody tweeted, it might have been Jeff Tiedrich, tweeted, I knew the shooter was white when they reported that he was taken alive, right? It's like, of course. And he's being described in the media as a lone wolf. This guy is not a lone wolf. He's part of a pack. He's got a club. He's got peeps. He's got a support network. You've got, the National Rifle Association making sure, and the Republican Party making sure that he had access to a semi-automatic weapon of war that he could walk into a supermarket with, number one. Number two, you've got an entire Nazi, white supremacist, racist element within American society that literally goes back to the founding of the Republic that radicalized this person, if that's the right word. I mean, I suppose you have to have a certain, I was going to say you have to have a certain proclivity or tendency to begin with, but frankly, I think that white supremacy and the tendency among white people to view people of color as inferior to them is so endemic in our society that really that's, one of the main places we need to be looking is at our society. And of course, he had a fan club. I mean, he was live streaming this thing on television. That should tell you an awful lot. And let's call this what it was, or what it is: terrorism. This is a white person going out to kill as many black people as possible. In fact, now it's coming out that he didn't intend to stop at the supermarket, that he intended to walk down the street and kill as many black people as he could. He was in a part of town that was 1% white. And he picked that place, that part of Buffalo, intentionally, drove hours to get there with all of his weapons. The Tops supermarket. But he left behind a manifesto, which is telling, shall we say. Some of the other notorious mass murderers of non-white people in history also left behind manifestos. Adolf Hitler wrote one in 1924. There's a long rambling screed about how Jews were driving a replacement in Germany. Yes, Adolf Hitler promoted white replacement theory in Mein Kampf. In fact, it's the essence of Mein Kampf. And then, of course, Anders Breivik, the guy who murdered 71 kids in Norway, white replacement theory. And he had a manifesto. He was followed by, Brenton Tarrant, who in Christchurch, New Zealand, who massacred 51 people in a mosque, left behind a lengthy manifesto. This is not something new or original. These guys are playing out a script that goes back to the 1920s, and arguably long before that. Blood libel against Jews is something that goes back literally thousands of years. And the belief of, in particular of white people believing that everybody else is inferior to them, but just generally speaking, racial hatreds or fears are as old as the human race. And this guy's just using it. The first 10 pages of his manifesto, the what do you call him? The Buffalo shooter, the Buffalo terrorist, the white supremacist. The first 10 pages of his manifesto were basically an argument for why white people are smarter than black people. The whole supposed IQ gap that is the subject of the book, The Bell Curve. And he also made the argument, weirdly, that while black people are dumb, they're also really smart when it comes to crime. It makes no sense, but these things very rarely makes sense. But his point in his first 10 pages was to build this case that black people couldn't be behind the replacement theory. Keep in mind, this is a theory, like I said, it animated Adolf Hitler. It was the basis of Nazism in Germany in the 30s. It animated Anders Breivik. It was the basis, this was 20 years ago, of the assassination of over 70 people in Norway. I mean, this is spread around the world. This happened in Christchurch, New Zealand. This has happened in multiple places now in the United States. And their theory is that, well, you know, that white people are being replaced by non-white people, but the non-white people are not smart enough to do this themselves. So there must be a super smart group of people who are very, very evil, and that would be, of course, in the sick and twisted minds of these people, the Jews. And that's the essence behind this. Now, in 2017, remember when Donald Trump said there's very good people on both sides about the Unite the Right rally? The Unite the Right rally was all about bringing together these disparate elements of the right wing. Bring in the Klan, bring in the Nazis, bring in the anti-Semites, bring in anybody they could find. Bring in the haters, bring in the homophobes. Let's unite the right. And what did they chant? Jews will not replace us. They weren't talking about Jews replacing them as in taking their jobs. They were talking about this supposed Jewish conspiracy to import people who reproduce at startling rates, people of color, into the United States to replace white people. That's what they were talking about. Let's just be upfront about this. This theory has gone mainstream. This is the theory that Tucker Carlson was promoting on Fox so-called news, and Laura Ingraham promoting on Fox so-called news, that was signed off on, in fact, encouraged after the fact by Rupert Murdoch's son, who's now running Fox News, or running that division. In 2011, Dylan Roof's mass murder of black churchgoers in Charleston, South Carolina. 2015, Tree of Life synagogue killings. I'm sorry, that was in 2015. Tree of Life synagogue killings in 2018. The murder of 23 people, mostly immigrants in El Paso, Texas in 2019. I mean, this has been going on a long time, and Tucker Carlson and the right wing have been mainstreaming this to the point now that the number 3 Republican in the House of Representatives, Elise Stefanik, is also, she was actually buying advertisements on Facebook promoting white replacement theory, or the so-called Great Replacement Theory. This is the number 3 Republican in the House of Representatives buying advertisements on Facebook promoting the replacement theory. Tucker Carlson, won't just come right out and say Jews are behind it. Instead, he talks about this pro-black ideology, critical race theory that was created by the Frankfurt School. Well, the Frankfurt School, it's Jewish Marxist intellectuals from the 30s. And his phrase was, I believe that was, it was Anders Breivik. His phrase was cultural Marxism. White replacement theory is not just an attack on black people or Hispanic people or Asian people or Native people. It is a weapon, as Jason Stanley writes in his newsletter this morning, it is a weapon directed by fascists at American democracy itself. Excuse me, he wrote that over at The Guardian. And I mean, this is, I was going to say beyond the pale, but this is now normal in America. And we know where this leads. We've seen this in other countries. We've seen this throughout history. Well, hell, we saw this here, too. This is in some ways an echo of the late 1870s, after the election was thrown to the House of Representatives, all to stab African Americans in the back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
End Reconstruction and bring us this situation today. So what do we do about this? And welcome back. Picking up your phone calls here, Patrick in California. Hey, Patrick, what's up? Where in California are you?
I'm actually in Vancouver, Washington.
Oh, really? Okay. Vancouver, Washington. Got it. Thank you, Patrick.
You know, in your talks in the past about the Second Amendment, you've never mentioned this theory. Perhaps as a whole, we as a people have abused the right of the Second Amendment, and that it should be looked at from that point of view instead of just trying to clip at the tails with gun control.
Well, the Second Amendment authorized the states to establish militias, citizen militias. That's pretty much it. I mean, the Heller agreement.
Yeah, but they're not looking at it from that point of view.
Horribly dishonest.
Right. They're not looking at it from that point of view. They're only looking at it from that narrow view of the right of the people shall not be abridged, or if that's the case, then the people as a whole have abused the right. We've shown that we can't have these weapons and keep them civilly.
Well, the Second Amendment puts the whole thing in the context of militias, which is war, is army. I mean, up until the 1980s, really, there was no dispute about the Second Amendment. Everybody agreed. It had to do with the 1700s, number one. It had to do with number two, it had to do with the debate about whether or not we should have a standing army during times of peace, or whether the state militias would be enough to defend the United States. And number three, that it was limited to that. I mean, it wasn't until the gun industry started heavily funding the National Rifle Association. This was actually around 1977, 78. That the NRA started getting piles and piles of money from the gun industry, and changed from being all about sports shooting and gun safety to being about promoting the so-called right to own a gun in America. I mean, this has been a 50-year campaign by one particular industry, the weapons industry, to claim that they have a special protection in the Constitution, which I don't see in the Constitution, and I've read the Heller decision, and in fact, I wrote a book about it, The Hidden History of Guns in the Second Amendment. And I think anybody who seriously considers it and reads that decision will see that it was just bogus. I mean, Scalia's whole argument was that back in the 1770s, one of the groups in Pennsylvania published a pamphlet in argument against the Constitution. It was an anti-federalist pamphlet against the Constitution, saying that in the Constitution they wanted to put an amendment so that people could have guns to protect themselves. I mean, that was all he could find. He couldn't find any of the founders, any of the founding writings, any of the debates at Constitution Hall in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. He couldn't find anything to back up his theory other than this one bizarre, weird, obscure tract that nobody had ever heard of until Scalia put it into a Supreme Court decision. I'm done ranting, Patrick. So is your point that we should be saying, okay, people, we gave you a right and you have misused it?
You have abused it. Yep.
Yeah, you have abused it.
That is what I'm saying.
Okay, I get it. I get it. I think you're absolutely right. And frankly, I don't think it should be a right. We're the only developed democracy in the world that claims that having a gun is a right. At the same time, the Republican Party that wants you to have a gun, it wants to say, yeah, but you can't marry people, whoever you love, and you can't be who you are. And you can't get an abortion if you've been raped, or if you get pregnant through an accident or don't want to be pregnant. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Back during World War I under President Wilson, we had a windfall profits tax on war profiteers, essentially, of 95% above their normal profits. You were allowed to make your normal profits, but when you started making more than that, 95% tax on that income. President Franklin Roosevelt revisited the exact same thing, windfall profits tax, during World War II, saying he didn't want this war to produce any new war millionaires. During the Korean War, Dwight Eisenhower had a windfall profits tax. during the echo of the fall of the Shah of Iran, when all the Iranian oil was taken off the marketplace and the price spiked, President Ronald Reagan imposed a windfall profits tax on the oil and gas industry to stop exploitation of that. Now we have Senator Bernie Sanders in the Senate and Ed Markey as well, along with him, and Representative Jamal Bowman in the House saying, let's do the same thing now. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Okay, I mentioned Elise Stefanik. She's been peddling the so-called great replacement theory. Now she's got a new rant about baby formula. I mean, this just another crazed rant from the GOP. Here she says, the White House, House Dems, and usual pedo grifters are so out of touch with the American people that rather than present any plan or urgency to address the nationwide baby formula crisis, they double down on sending pallets of formula to the southern border. Joe Biden has no plan. That's her quote. This is the number 3 person in leadership in the House of Representatives, in Republican leadership, calling the White House and House Democrats pedophiles, and saying that there is no plan to address the baby food shortage. Actually, you know, Biden has called people together. He gave a speech about it. He's been talking about it. The problem, frankly, and you know, let's be very clear about this. The problem, frankly, is twofold. Number one, Donald Trump changed our trade policies to make it really difficult to import things from Canada. Finished manufactured products like baby formula. So we can't import it right now. And I mean, and this was an actual trade agreement. This was the, you know, his new and improved NAFTA, remember, Donald Trump? I mean, this is now the law of the land. It's not like, you know, you can just go around that. And number 2, you've got 4 multinational conglomerates that own the entire, or the vast majority, the baby food or baby formula market. And one of them, Abbott Laboratories, had a bacterial infection in one of their production lines in Michigan that killed 2 babies and sickened a bunch of others. So they've been shut down for 4 months trying to find the source of that infection. And to the best of my knowledge, they still haven't found it. Which is why they're saying, you know, this could last for another year. And then Stefanik says, oh, we're sending pallets of them to the southern border. No, we're not. Yeah, there were some supplies down there for, refugees who have babies who get caught. But, I mean, this is just so over the top. This is what Republicans do because they have nothing for the American people. You talk about actual policy. Senator Rick Scott, the guy who is in charge of the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee, the RSCC, his job is to get Republicans elected to the United States Senate. He came out with an 11-point manifesto. His plan to what Republicans will do if they take power in America. Now, Mitch McConnell famously, and the entire Republican Party for the last 6 years, have refused to tell us what they would do if they had power. Seriously, they refused to tell us. There is no Republican platform. But Rick Scott came out and said, yeah, what we need to do is raise taxes on the bottom half of Americans who aren't paying income taxes. They all need to be paying taxes. And we need to put a provision into federal law that says that all programs sunset after 5 years if Congress doesn't, automatically if Congress doesn't stop it, including Social Security and Medicare. This is the Republicans' plan. End Social Security, end Medicare, increase taxes on working people. Now, they don't want you to hear about that. They don't want you to know about that. So what are they doing? They're screaming about baby food pallets to the southern border and all this weird stuff, including the so-called Great Replacement theory that has now led to the death of 10 people, the wounding of 3 more in the most recent attacks in the United States. It seems to me, I asked before, the kind of semi-rhetorical question, I suppose, what do we do about this? It seems to me, number one, we call it out. We label it as poison. We make it socially unacceptable.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And then after that, what do? That's something we can talk about. We'll be right back with your calls.
Hey, it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Jeffrey Sachs' new book, Building the New American Economy, Smart Theories.
If God is love, don't be a jerk. Finding a faith that makes us better humans. This is from the introduction titled, You Had One Job. If you want a good laugh, Google the phrase, you had one job. The results are hilariously tragic parade of seemingly impossible fails, unfathomably poor planning, and face-palming, inducing human error. A piece of melted cheese on top of a fast food burger bun. The word stop misspelled on a street crossing. A keep to the right sign with its arrow facing left. A toilet lid inexplicably installed below the seat itself. It's strange stuff. Seeing these stupefying train wrecks and task execution tends to elicit two responses. Usually making you feel a little bit better about yourself while simultaneously wanting to track down the culprits in an effort to understand how they managed to neglect the primary duty assigned to them. We begin to speculate. Were they temporarily distracted? Did they not properly comprehend the instructions? Did they feel as though someone above them in the chain of command dropped the ball? Were they just plain lazy? When people miss the point so spectacularly, we want to know how and why. Because that kind of failure feels impossible from the outside. It seems unfathomable to get the main thing wrong, and seeing it happen sparks our curiosity. I imagine Jesus knows well the curiosity that comes with watching people give clear direction lose their way. As a longtime Christian by aspiration, if not always in practice, I often envision an exasperated Jesus coming back and the first words out of his mouth to his followers as his feet hit the pavement being, "You had one job, love. So what happened?" I wonder what massive wave of excuses and rationalizations would come flooding from the mouths of the faithful multitude in front of him, how they might justify their mistreatment of the assailed humanity in their care, the verbal and theological gymnastics they'd attempt to avoid culpability for their own cruelty. Would they stridently recite him a verse from Leviticus? Would they blame the liberal media for morally corrupting America? Would they talk about people's wicked lifestyle choices? Would they argue that they were loving the sinners in their midst, but simply hating their sin? Would they frantically offer up the same platitudes and parrot back the same partisan talking points that they've gotten used to brandishing on social media and proffering in Sunday school classes? And if all else failed to convince him, would they quote Jesus to himself in a desperate Hail Mary effort to pass the buck to him for what they did or failed to do while supposedly standing up for him? And there, fully seen in the piercing gaze of the namesake of their very faith tradition, with all their justifications and excuses exhausted and only their fully exposed hearts left, would any of their responses be sufficient reasons for refusing to love? When that was the singular task and primary commandment that he left them responsible for tending to? In my less compassionate moments, I admit that I like to picture it not going well for them. I know it's far less than admirable, let alone Christ-like. But some days my heart strangely warms at the possibility of a few billion brimstone-breathing evangelists, sanctimonious conservative politicians, and plank-eyed judgmental Christian neighbors all having to explain themselves in a sanctified flop-swept moment they can't exegete or gaslight themselves out of, and they all get what they have coming to them. But my self-righteous revelry doesn't last long. The mirror calls me out as I remember what I think I know about Jesus, and that rescues me from full-blown, unabated hubris. I begin to wonder what my excuses might be, how I'd spin the enmity I manufacture here, what story I'd come up with for not doing the one task we both know compromises a disciple's job description. And if I really believe what I'm supposed to believe, are any of my justifications sufficient? If God is love, and if Jesus is the perfect expression of that love, and if I'm supposedly trying to follow that Jesus, how can I be so love impaired so frequently? How do I miss the singular point so consistently? It's not as if I didn't know what I was signing up for, like some lengthy online user agreement I blindly accept in haste, missing the bombshell fine print underneath. Having read the Gospels a few million times, give or take a few 100,000, I know the primary commandment is not something I need to excavate from cumbersome layers of foreign language translations and cultural mores of the time. Jesus himself clearly laid out the most important commandment for me and for everyone who's ever cracked open a Bible, and even most people who've never cracked open a Bible. And so we'd all understand what's being asked of us going in, so there would be no post-altar call buyer's remorse or deathbed claims of a sucker punch, bait and switch. Loving God and neighbor and self is the elemental stuff of Christian prayers, songs, T-shirts, and bumper stickers, and we know that. But as the master Morpheus said to protege Neo in the first and only truly great Matrix film, there is a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. Love is the path that Jesus laid out for us. The book, John Pavlovitz's If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, finding a faith that better years. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. So Elise Stefanik is furious, I tell you, that the media is pointing out that she has been promoting the so-called white replacement theory or great replacement theory or just replacement theory, the Tucker replacement theory, whatever you want to call it. She was running an ad on Facebook that said, and in fact, by the way, what's his name? I just posted this on, I just retweeted on Twitter. Parker Malloy, who I follow on Twitter, just posted the actual ads, Elise Stefanik's actual ads, that she's out here going, I never said that, I didn't do that, but it's not my fault. One of the ads says, radical Democrats are planning their most aggressive move yet, a permanent election insurrection. Their plan to grant amnesty to 11 million illegal immigrants, million is in all caps, will overthrow our current electorate and create a permanent liberal majority in Washington. Yes, overthrow our current electorate. In other words, brown people replace white people. Then Representative Matt Gaetz, her colleague, tweets, Tucker Carlson is correct about replacement theory as he explains what is happening in America. Then Scott Perry, the chair of the so-called House Freedom Caucus. I call him the Cokehead Caucus, but whatever. Because they, take so much money from the Koch brothers' various enterprises. This is the chair of the House Freedom Caucus, Representative Scott Perry, said, quote, we're replacing national-born American, native-born Americans to permanently transform the political landscape of this very nation. 40% of Republicans agree with the statement, quote, there is a group of people in this country who are trying to replace native-born Americans with immigrants who agree with their political views. 40% of Republicans believe this replacement theory. As Max Boot writes for the Washington Post, a few hours after the Buffalo shooting, Arizona Senate candidate Blake Masters posted a video saying, quote, the Democrats want open borders so they can bring in and amnesty tens of millions of illegal aliens. That's their election strategy. J.D. Vance says Democrats are not only opening the borders to create a, quote, shift in the democratic makeup of this country, end quote, but that Biden is deliberately letting fentanyl into the country, quote, to kill a bunch of MAGA voters in the middle of the heartland, end quote. So now J.D. Vance is taking it a step further. No, it's not. We're not just trying to replace all the white people in America. We're trying to kill all the white people in America, these horrible liberals, right? Right. And the Jews who are with them, right? This is beyond sick and twisted. It's just beyond sick and twisted. Tony in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Hey, I listened to the, glad to be part of the show. I listened to the Gwen Stefanics, but it's really it's bigger. It's part of American history, to have this level of hatred. And while they're saying that they're after the white people, it's really the white people that's doing the killing. And it's amazing that, right, and it's amazing that these last two kids, the Emmanuel Church shooter and this other guy over the weekend, these guys have killed like 18 or 19 people and don't have a scratch. But yet a black guy gets killed for a busted taillight, right?
Yeah.
So, I just think it's part of America. And my question to you, Tom, is people have come and gone over these 400 years. So who keeps this thing going? Is it the dark money? Is it the coke? People like the coke? Who keeps it going? Generation. By the way, we cannot talk about history because they have this thing against book bans. So can we really?
Right. It's tragic, Tony. I'll tell you, in my opinion, what and who is keeping this all alive, and I think it's a very, very important question. First of all, you've got, it's kind of a variation on what Lyndon Johnson famously said back in 1963. Where he said, if you tell the lowest white man that he's higher than the highest black man, he'll let you pick his pocket all day long. And so there's always been this, since the 1600s in the United States, there has been an attempt by white people to characterize themselves as superior to black people, first to justify enslaving black people, and then to justify living, separate, segregation, all the way up to the 1950s, 1960s, and now as a political justification, number one. Number two, you've got political parties who see this as a potent political force, specifically the Republican Party, although at one time it was the Democratic Party prior to the 1960s. On this day in history, George Wallace won the Michigan primary. Let us not forget the Democratic primary, but we'll get to that in the third hour. But number two, you've got a political party that sees this as something that can help them win elections, because all they've got to offer the American people is they're going to raise taxes on working class people and they're going to end Medicare and Social Security. So they got to come up with something else. Oh, look, there's a black person over there. Look out. So that, that's their strategy. And then number three, you've got, I'll get back to you, Tony, in just a second. And then number three, you've got a bunch of really, really rich people and big corporations who are funding that Republican Party, who is using that racism. And they're funding them because they want tax breaks and they want deregulation that'll increase their profits. And they don't care what the Republican Party does to stay in power, just so long as they get their tax breaks and their deregulation. Back to you, Tony.
Okay, well, one other point is one of the things that the guy mentioned in his manifesto, and one of the biggest things I think is that black people are dumb, but they never say they was against the law to read for 246 years. Yeah. So, I mean, if 1 + 1 is 2. If you tell people, matter of fact, the people that built the colleges, did they award anybody in their lineage a scholarship to those colleges? No, they died. Right. And built all these colleges. Now, when I was coming up before this quote-unquote wokeness, I used to say, wow, this college was built in 1865. Man, what a history. What a legacy. Oh, my gosh. But now you find out slaves built them. Right. And now we're just coming around to admitting some of the schools have. I wish but see, America, I don't think it'll never get to the core. I really don't, because it's so pervasive and it's part of our history, and the Supreme Court has definitely done their part. So I just think I don't think we were, it took a civil war just to get out of slavery. So I don't want nothing like that. But what can we do in 2022? And every time we try to do anything to try to help those people, man, everything goes crazy. Yeah. Oh my God, it's a liberal society.
Yeah, I know, Tony.
We help make America great.
Yeah, there you go.
Right?
There you go. Black people built this country, and that's not an exaggeration. And the North as well, by the way. The wealth of the North came out of the cotton of the South, and that came out of the labor of black people. Tony, thank you. Thank you for the call. Bruce in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Bruce, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Shame on us if we're not taking the slogan pro-life back from these people after the shootings and with climate and everything else. and I'm sure you hear this all the time, but we need to be throwing that back in their face that we are the pro-life party, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing is, as a vegetarian for 23 years, I'm probably more pro-life than they are, but I would never take that choice away from anyone.
There you go. Yeah, well said, Bruce.
All right,
well said. Thank you. Joseph in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Joseph, what's up?
Hi, Tom. First of all, I would like to say something real quickly. Ted Cruz won his lawsuit in the U.S. Supreme Court.
I know. They just expanded Citizens United is what they did this morning.
Yeah. Okay. Here's my question for you. My question is: you have oligarchs and you have theocrats. Do you think there'll be a war between the oligarchs and the theocrats coming to a theater near you?
No, I think they found common cause. They have united along with the racists. You've got the oligarchs, the theocrats, and the racists, and they've all united around and within the Republican Party to try to end democracy in the United States. And I never thought I'd say that, and I never thought I'd say it so matter-of-factly, but it is fairly obvious.
Okay, one more quick thing. You remember Devin Nunes lost his seat, right? And there's another one, Steele. Amy Steele, she was in Orange County. I live in Orange County. Mm-hmm. Katie Porter is now my congresswoman.
Right.
And I've been giving her money before she became my congresswoman because I think she's the smartest woman in the House. And I think if something happens to Dianne Feinstein, I think they should appoint her onto the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, well, there's an incredible list. I mean, I agree with you that Katie Porter is, if not certainly one of the smartest people in Congress. She's also media savvy. She knows what she's doing. She knows how, and she's fearless. But you've got, but when that happens, and Dianne Feinstein is going to be leaving the Senate, eventually. I mean, it may not happen for a year or two, but frankly, I think it needs to happen sooner rather than later. But there's some great people who are kind of queuing up to be in that line. Obviously, Katie Porter is one of them. I would say Ro Khanna is one of them. I think probably Adam Schiff is one of them. There's some really good
I forgot about Adam Schiff. You're right. Adam Schiff is a wonderful person.
Yeah, there's some really good high-profile Democrats in California who could run for that seat. Joseph, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Yes, the Democrats of the pro-life party, they're not the ones who are saying, oh, we need more semi-automatic weapons for people to walk into supermarkets and kill people with. Yes. 45 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. We'll be right back, continuing our conversation. What do we do about this? And welcome back. David in Los Angeles. Hey, David, what's on your mind today? David? KPFK? Los Angeles? Not hearing David. Okay, let's try Warren in Seattle, Washington. Hey, Warren, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. When you were talking about abortion, I didn't hear maybe once mention of the First Amendment and freedom of religion, and there'll be no state-sponsored religion, and that whole issue.
Uh-huh.
How can they say I can't have an abortion when my God says life begins at birth, when the fetus is born at birth?
Yeah, I think the problem that you have with that argument, Warren, and I don't disagree with your point, but the problem that you have with that argument is that there is no major religious denomination out there that is coming out and aggressively saying this is what we believe. Whereas on the other hand, you've got both the Catholics and the white evangelicals saying that they believe that human life begins at fertilization, or in the case of the Catholics, that human life begins at the moment of horniness, and therefore there should not be birth control. So, you've got some two religious groups that represent probably 35% of Americans who are, very strongly assert a particular religious viewpoint with regard to abortion and have for decades. And then nobody's really taking that opposite side, Warren. I know the Church of Satan has tried, but I don't think they're going to make it, and I don't think that's a good argument.
But the First Amendment, guarantees that right.
It does, and that's I wrote two op-eds about this actually, last week or the week before, about how this whole abortion thing really is about religion. It's really not about abortion.
And I just think the pro-abortion, the pro-lifers, if I can use that, the pro-abortion people could use the freedom of religion in their argument towards.
Yeah, they absolutely should, and they have tried in the past. Warren, thank you. Excellent point. Carol in Valencia, California. Hey, Carol, what's up?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Yes, you were talking about Second Amendment. And one of my recent readings, I think it might have been Colin Underwood, was talking about the fact that the Second Amendment was a concession to the slave owners because they used the militia to go find their slaves.
That's correct. There's two chapters about this in my book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. It was written the way it was. Originally, it said that the original language essentially gave the nation the power to call out the militia. And Patrick Henry, who was the largest slaveholder in the state of Virginia, went nuts and gave this speech about how there's over 300,000 blacks here in, his phrase, here in Virginia, and what will happen if they rise up? Will not the federal government use that as an excuse to end slavery? Blah-de-blah-de-blah. And so James Madison changed the language to say a free state instead of a free nation. And and it was he was throwing a bone to the southern states whose militias were slave patrols.
That's what we always do. We're fighting the Civil War. We've lost the Civil War.
Well, maybe, but it's still being litigated. I'm with you, Carol. Thank you. We'll be right back. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. Back in 2018, Pastor Dave Barnhart of the St. Juania United Methodist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, delivered a sermon that is worth revisiting. He said, "The unborn are a convenient group of people to advocate for. They never make demands of you. They are morally uncomplicated, unlike the incarcerated, addicted, or the chronically poor. They don't resent your condescension or complain that you're not politically correct. Unlike widows, they don't ask you to question patriarchy. Unlike orphans, they don't need money, education, or childcare. Unlike aliens, they don't bring all that racial, cultural, and religious baggage that you dislike. They allow you to feel good about yourself without any work at creating or maintaining relationships. And when they're born, you can forget about them because they cease to be unborn. It's almost as if, by being born, they have died to you. You can love the unborn and advocate for them without substantially challenging your own wealth or power." The whole clip is over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back, George in Cripple Creek, Virginia. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Hey, John, how you doing, Tom? You were talking about that, great replacement theory going back to Hitler's Mein Kampf.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back even further than that. Are you familiar with the secret protocols of the learned elders of Zion?
Yeah, this was put together by the head of the Tsar's internal secret police in, 1910? 1912?
Right, exactly. And even to this day, so it's been discredited. People still believe in that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was the cornerstone of Hitler's propaganda efforts, was the protocols of the elders. Yeah, absolutely. George, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. You're absolutely right.
Good work.
Yeah, thank you. It is more than 100 years. And of course, anti-Semitism and blood libel against Jews goes back way more than 100 years. Morris in Long Beach. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today?
Hey, you know what, Tom? I was going to let you go to later in the week, but when you mentioned President Johnson, remember President Johnson, my boy, if you can convince the lowest white man that he is better than the highest black man, he will allow you to pick his pocket. Remember that comment earlier?
I do.
You're absolutely correct. I've got a kid. I'm not bragging on this kid, all right? But I've got a kid. She gave a speech to 200 other AP students. I think she was 15 at the time. And her conversation or her speech was about how racism is used as a tool, and it manipulates people. And the reason why the upper class folks and corporations and things like that are very dependent upon manipulating people is because they do not want a progressive income tax. So we always are dealing with false narratives, right on? The big stuff we never get to because we're lost in this little stuff. Darn it, I was having a week, but Tom, when you said that about Johnson, I said I had to call. And I remember that talk that my daughter gave about, how racism is used as a tool to manipulate people, and it blinds us from what we really should be looking at.
Wow. Sounds like she's a chip off the old block, Morris.
But she listens to the Thom Hartmann program, too, sometime, all right?
Okay, well, give her our best. Give her our best. And spot on, Morris, spot on. Thank you. Juanita in Presser, Washington. Hey, Juanita, what's on your mind?
Hey, have you been, there was a hearing on the abuse of the Native American children recently on C-SPAN, and this is where these children were taken to the boarding schools, and they were literally Native American children.
Right.
Literally stripped of their culture. They were punished for speaking their language, and this was done through the government and religious organizations.
Yes.
And many of these children were abused. Now, who's trying to replace who in that case?
Oh, that's an excellent point. You want replacement theory? Look at what we did to the Native Americans.
Right, and this was going on up to 1970.
I know, yeah.
And no one speaks about that. So, in fact, the governor of the state of Oklahoma has warned the tribal people in Oklahoma about don't even think about allowing abortion clinics on your land.
Oh, I know. And he's got 40 tribes in the state. It's nuts. Juanita, thank you. Thank you. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's on your mind?
Well, there's quite a bit on my mind, but I'm going to try to keep it pithy, sir.
Okay. I read your op-ed over at opednews.com the other day, over the weekend, by the way. Great writing. But back to you.
Thank you, sir. Speaking of that piece, one of the things that I talk about in that piece, and this is not self-promotion, is that as black people in the United States, we live in existence where we look at everything in reverse. Everything. The young man that was murdered execution style in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which isn't far from where you grew up, and a place where I've been before. He was shot point blank range in the back of the head. What we do as black people, we say, could that happen if that was a black officer doing that to a white guy? We look at the shooting in Buffalo. This man goes in and he kills multiple people, a mass shooting, racially motivated. And the first thing, it's racism on top of racism. The first thing that came out was, well, we're going to make sure that he gets life for the official from the prosecution that are going to be prosecuting this case. Tell me where a black man has gone in and killed 11 white people and his black ass didn't die. Matter of fact, he dies if he wolf whistles at a white woman as an Emmett Till.
Right. They talked this kid down. He came out with all these guns, and they talked him down and got him to put down the guns. I wouldn't see that happening if he was wearing a turban or if his skin was much darker.
Yeah, but I'm not. One thing that I'm and I don't mean to be rude. But this bifurcation of, well, the blacks is just, you had a caller that said, well, the Native Americans. My maternal grandmother was a Cherokee Indian. My maternal great grandmother. I understand that, but they were already here. The only people dragged to this nation against their will is us. The only people in this country that it was illegal to teach to read and write. They even though they tried to take their culture, they at least tried to put them in schools. The only people that it was taught that it was illegal to teach to read and write was us. They had to pass legislation in the Church Arson Prevention Act because so many of our churches were being bombed. Little girls, 4 little girls, Joan Baez wrote a song about it, bombed in church. No black man has ever done that. And you spoke of Lyndon Baines Johnson. Lyndon Baines Johnson allowed it for the Civil Rights Act, called it the N-word bill. So, you know, this discussion is perpetually dishonest, and I'm just totally tired of it, Tom. Okay. It happens over and over.
All right. I got it.
You know, okay.
Kenyatta, I got to run. I'm sorry, but thank you. We'll be right back. It's, what are we going to pick up here? Oh, why democracy's enemies always want to destroy trust. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The hidden history of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at CozyEarth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmanReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Brainwashing of My Dad, How the Rise of the Right-Wing Media Changed a Father and Divided Our Nation and How We Can Fight Back, by Jen Senko. This is from Chapter 6, How Talk Radio Hijacked My Dad. In 1984, Reagan was reelected in a landslide victory against liberal Democrat Walter Mondale. That year was also when everything began to change for my dad and our family. In 1984, Dad retired from his job with the federal government at age 62. Both my parents missed being near the shore, so they moved back to New Jersey and settled in Toms River, a town where there was a large retired population. Still energetic, my father got a part-time engineering job 3 or 4 days a week, necessitating a long solo commute by car. He didn't want to waste time on music while driving. He wanted to be stimulated mentally, and he discovered talk radio to keep himself company. At the time, Bob Grant was the dominant talk radio personality. Often called the conservative radio, Grant was an openly racist, sexist, far-right shock jock. On his WABC radio show, he referred to blacks and Hispanics as savages. He believed them to be inferior, and he once even called Martin Luther King Jr. a slimeball. With his combative and testy style, he was considered a pioneer of the talk radio format. Soon, Grant became my dad's commuting buddy. I didn't know Bob Grant from Joe Namath, but I did know I didn't care for his style of yelling at callers or hanging up on them if they disagreed with him. My mother was not a fan of Grant's either, and she delighted in telling me the story of how she ran into him one day. She was at the Ocean County Mall eatery, sitting at a table having lunch when she saw Grant walk in. She recognized him, and when he passed her table, she asked, "You're Bob Grant, aren't you?" He said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Oh, my husband likes you, but I don't." He had been walking away and turned to look back at my mother and gave a little laugh. She said she just sat there at the table and did not smile back. Gradually, it seemed my dad started becoming more agitated after listening to Bob Grant. Eventually, he became consistently more irritable, excitable, and easy to anger. Little did we know, a metamorphosis was beginning. Along with massive deregulation in the communications industry, there were several other factors that led to talk radio's explosion of popularity in the 1980s. The first was that music had moved from the AM dial to the high-fidelity sound of FM, and thus left a void on the AM dial. Broadcasters realized that filling that blank airspace with mainstream news wouldn't make much money. However, entertainment made money, and talk radio was entertainment at its finest, even when it masqueraded as news coverage. Human conversation didn't benefit from high-fidelity sound the way music did, so talk radio filled the void on the AM radio waves perfectly. The second contributor to talk radio's rise was the new accessibility of satellite technology, allowing anyone to broadcast a show nationally. And the third was the fact that when 1-800 numbers became available, you could have callers call in from all over the country. These factors combined to make a pretty powerful storm. The format of talk radio was, of course, not new. The format first debuted in the 1920s, continuing with Father Charles Coughlin's controversial and anti-Semitic radio broadcasts in the 1930s. Coughlin has often been referred to as the father of hate radio, and he paved the way for all that has come in his medium. Many of the most famous conservative talk radio personalities modeled themselves after the 1950s sensation Joe Pyne. His show, It's Your Nickel, consisted of Pyne debating his opinions with people calling in. Calls often culminated with him insulting the caller, to the delight of his audience. The format of talk radio evolved from there, but many of the most popular shows and hosts, including Bob Grant, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and Glenn Beck, have stuck with the confrontational tone and high-emotion interactions that these early hosts introduced. There haven't been many successful liberal talk radio hosts. Ed Schultz, Randy Rhoads, and Alan Colmes tried to make inroads, but simply failed to draw a large audience, in quotes. You may wonder why conservative talk radio programs have been so phenomenally popular while equivalent liberal shows have foundered. Aside from big money to support it, the secret seems to lie in the inflammatory approach favored by these so-called conservative hosts. Abram Brown of Forbes says of liberal talk radio shows, it's not the same thing as a Limbaugh or a Hannity. It's more general, not really railing against the system. No one's yelling, we need to get rid of the Republicans. They're the worst thing that happened in this country. But you'll hear conservative radio hosts say that about liberals on their programs. Brown makes another good point that speaks to that. Tell your audience that the mainstream media is corrupt and biased, that there's more than that there's all the more reason to turn to your conservative talk radio to get the truth. Anger is a hot commodity. Finding an enemy is even hotter. Or as Ailes might say, it's the emotions, stupid. He did not actually say that. A little-known but very chilling example of how powerfully influential radio can be is the 1994 Rwandan genocide, where an estimated 800,000 citizens were brutally murdered by their fellow citizens, the Hutus. This happened after an intense radio campaign that started in 1993 dehumanized and demonized one group, the Tutsis. Militia groups were formed, and police and soldiers joined them in the killing. Samantha Power, who later served as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, said killers often carried a machete in one hand and a transistor radio in the other hand. Dad discovers Rush Limbaugh. About a year or so after working part-time in his long commute, my dad officially retired. The book, The Brainwashing of My Dad, by Jen Senko.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. My rant today over at HartmannReport.com is titled, Why Democracy's Most Relentless Enemies Always First Try to Destroy Trust. And it starts out pointing out that the crisis with the Supreme Court, and there's multiple ones now. They're about to rule in a gun case too, and they just expanded Citizens United this morning. But the crisis with the Supreme Court, the racist mass shooter in Buffalo, the Republican primary candidates all trying to one-up each other on who's more willing to throw out votes in 2024, and are hitting 1 million COVID deaths, all share something in common, and that is a lack of trust in our society. Donald Trump destroyed our trust in so many ways. Our society is coming unraveled in so many ways. For example, there was a fascinating piece in the New York Times over the weekend arguing that, well, they came right out and said it. This is a quote from this piece in the New York Times on Saturday or Sunday. If the United States had the same COVID death rate as Australia, about 900,000 lives would have been saved. We're about to hit 1 million. 900,000 of those people did not need to die. But Donald Trump politicized it. And then when they looked deeper into this, they said, and this is, again, a quote from this piece in the Times, dozens of interviews, along with survey data and scientific studies from around the world, point to a life-saving trait that Australians displayed from the top of government to the hospital floor, and that Americans have shown they lack: trust in science and institutions, but especially in one another. This whole promotion of replacement of the white replacement theory, destroy trust in each other. I mean, this is, Tucker Carlson has turned this into an industry. Much of this, in its current incarnation, this assault on trust in the United States, not so much the specifics of it. Obviously, racism and racially motivated murders have been with us from the founding of the Republic, et cetera. But and so many of these other pieces that I'm talking about that don't have to do with race, that's my, et cetera, all predated the 1980s. But really in the 1980s, what happened was a campaign to destroy our trust in government. Prior to the 1980s, the vast majority of Americans trusted government, at least to be able to do some things. And much of that trust has been shattered. This was a campaign that was kicked off by Lewis Powell in 1971 with his famous Powell memo, by a bunch of, basically rich white guys. And their goal initially wasn't to destroy America. It was simply to get their taxes reduced and reduce regulation on their businesses so that they could keep up their profits, even if, people died in car crashes because they didn't have safe cars, or people died from, unsafe food, et cetera. But to get enough people to vote for politicians who would cut their taxes and who would deregulate their toxic factories, they brought in the religious fanatics, the white supremacists, and insecure men obsessed with guns. And their main message? Well, Ronald Reagan said it over and over and over again. The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Their main message was, you can't trust government. You can't trust the American government. Reagan said this over and over. Reagan went so far as to say, there's no good people in government, because if they were good, they would have been hired by private industry. Another meme that the libertarian right loves to quote. Of course, in his first State of the Union address in 1981, Reagan just came right out and said, the problem, government is not the solution to our problems, government is the problem. And so then, seeing this dynamic at play, that an entire political party was trying to destroy Americans' faith in American institutions and in America, Putin gets into the act and says, yeah, let's double down on that. Let's piggyback on that and promote mistrust, promote conspiracy wackos, and promote the racists in the United States. Because he knows, I guess would be the proper word, he's still around, that if you want to destroy a nation, you simply destroy its people's trust in each other and their trust in their government. So their goal was to pit Americans against each other and weaken our democracy, and thus our example to the world, which makes Russia look bad, right? Hey, everybody wants to be like America, not like Russia. And the first major victory that Putin and his friends within the GOP and the NRA had in this regard was putting Donald Trump in the White House in 2016. The billionaires really just wanted politicians who would dance to their tune. Well, that's all Putin wants too. And that's what Trump tried to deliver. He tried to destroy NATO. He tried to destroy the European Union. He tried to destroy America. He certainly destroyed our trust. Trust is the most important commodity a government has. It even defines the stability and value of its currency. It's essential to a functioning society. So when Donald Trump and Paul Manafort and Vladimir Putin decided that they were going to destroy America, they aimed their efforts at the single most important part of any nation's ability to survive: trust. Trump destroyed our trust in that our leaders would behave with integrity and not lie to us by telling over 30,000 documented lies during his 4 years in office, including lies about COVID that led to 900,000 unnecessary deaths. He destroyed our trust in our election systems, which will make a coup much easier the next time his followers want to try to overthrow an election. He destroyed our trust in each other with his racist, xenophobic, and misogynist rhetoric and policies. Yeah, I know it was bad before. It's worse now. He destroyed the trust the rest of the world had in America by pulling us out of the Iran nuclear deal and the Paris Climate Agreement, by trying to blackmail Ukraine, and by working to destroy NATO. Putin daily tries to destroy America's trust in each other with an army of bots and trolls running social media campaigns who are supporting domestic terrorism, who are supporting medical crackpots, who are supporting violent racists. The right-wing media in this country does everything they can on a daily basis to destroy Americans' trust in each other, particularly across racial lines and gender lines. Most recently, they're using our children and our schools as their foils. Meanwhile, for 40 years, the Republican Party took blood money and election support from the weapon industry's front group, the NRA. The result last year was 45,000 gun deaths in America. The entire European Union, which has 100 million more people than the United States, had only 7,000 gun deaths last year, and most of those were suicides. No other country in the world regularly has mass shootings like we do here in America. School children can no longer trust in their own safety, particularly since the Supreme Court's corrupt Heller decision. Trust is further collapsing as the institutions we've historically relied on are turning against American values. Two presidents who were rejected by a majority of American voters put 4 right-wing fanatics on the Supreme Court. Those justices are now taking political positions with which the majority of Americans disagree. Abortion is the most recent example, but there are others. This morning they said, oh yeah, Ted Cruz, no problem. We'll loosen the campaign finance rules for you, which is further diminishing Americans' trust in government and our political institutions. Meanwhile, you've got giant fossil fuel companies who are trying to make as much money as they can as fast as they can, trying to destroy trust by funding climate denial, gaslighting us about how they themselves are trying to go green. You got massive insurance and pharmaceutical companies ripping us off on a daily basis and then pouring so much of that corrupt money back into the political system that Americans, believe we're helpless to do anything about it. You got hedge funds and banksters who are getting rich at the expense of trusting communities and average Americans by exploiting loopholes that their very own politicians have drilled into our regulatory system. We're literally the only country in the world where you can go massively into debt just trying to go to college in a state school. We're also the only developed country in the world where 500,000 people lose their homes and go completely bankrupt every year because somebody in the family got sick. Our Citizens United pay-to-play system of politics has broken our trust. We don't even trust the media anymore. I mean, Les Moonves came right out and said, yeah, Donald may be terrible for America, but he sure is making money for CBS. Go, Donald. Our social media companies use algorithms that amplify outrage, anger, and hate to enhance their profits. We're seeing this loss of social trust as a result of the social media companies doing this, showing up in everything from teenage suicide statistics to the January 6th attempt to murder Mike Pence. And now Trump and Putin are working to convince Republican lawmakers to abandon a fellow democracy, Ukraine, with youthful idiots like Rand Paul and the Republicans in the House. Over 50 Republicans voted no on aid to Ukraine in the House last week. Rand Paul held it up for a whole week. They're voting on it today instead of last week because of one guy, Rand Paul. The guy who did the secret trip to Russia to hand deliver a note to Putin from Trump. Remember that? Political dark money and religious hatred. This stuff is poison. This is like heroin in our bloodstream, in the bloodstream of our nation. It numbs us for a while, and then eventually it kills us. We once outlawed this kind of stuff, dark money. We once had trust in this country, or at least, some trust. The next 2 elections may be our last chance to elect people who we can trust. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's your media support group for We the People, the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back with it was Trump stealing top secret documents for profit and geeky science. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind today?
Well, I keep wondering whether we need to do some early education training of Republicans on number sequencing, because Amendment number 1 was the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Actually, that's in the Declaration of Independence, but, it was free speech and religion, yes.
It was pretty important. Yeah. It was first.
Yep.
Why the Second Amendment was second was because maybe that wasn't quite as important, and it wasn't about everybody running around with their guns and shooting anybody that didn't look like them or agree with them.
It had to do with the defense of the country. There was a genuine debate going on.
Their local area against British troops.
That's right. Or French or Spanish. We fought all of them.
Yeah. And so unless you see a redcoat storming down your street in step, you could go out and confront them in step with your musket and say, what's going on here? Maybe keep your guns back in the gun store, or, just keep them locked up, because clearly there's too many stupid, crazy people running around with guns.
Yeah, I'm with you. And there's too many guns. I mean, we're the only country, the only developed country in the world that has more guns than people. Even Iraq doesn't have more guns than people. I mean, it's insane. Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Sandra, thank you.
Yeah.
Very well said. Barney in Argos, Indiana. Hey, Barney, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, well, there's a lot on my mind. There's a lot you covered, Tom, but I was going to talk last week about how the Democrats can win, but today the topic ought to be about the violence with guns. And if you'll remember, there was a Supreme Court justice that said the Constitution is not a suicide pact.
Right. I think that was Brandeis, but yeah.
Yeah. So when it gets to be this level that you can't really feel safe anywhere, you can't feel safe in a church, you can't feel safe in a grocery store, you can't feel safe in a school, you can't feel safe in a movie theater, then it's time to act. And the people have to demand this.
I agree.
And when 70% of the country wants this, and these unelected characters that they put on the court and they lie their way on the court, the people have to do something about it. Now, I was thinking 80 million people went to the movies in the 40s. Mm-hmm. 80 million people voted for one party, or around 80 million the last time. Now, I noticed there were so many movies to pick from at the time also. So the advertisements had to be really, really right on the mark. And I believe the Democrats have to go right on the mark on this. Very personal. Social Security is on the line. Medicare is on the line. Your life is on the line. And to get those messages out, to get the people out, because if they're not coming out, they're going to lose. And not only they're going to lose, everybody's going to lose. The whole country's going to lose. Putin's going to win. Trump's going to go back in there. And as he almost destroyed the country, he's going to on the next try.
I agree. Although I think the ticket is not going to be Trump. I think it's going to be DeSantis Trump. I think it's going to be Ron DeSantis and Don Jr.
Exactly.
That's my prediction. But yeah, Barney, I'm with you. Barney, thank you. We'll be back 21 minutes past the hour. Our geeky science and our Trump stealing documents for profit? Seriously? Well, who would be surprised, actually? We'll be right back.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them.
Back in 1981, the first year of the Reagan presidency, one of our two senators from Oregon here, Mark Hatfield, wrote an op-ed for the Oregon Territory newspaper about the new right, about this whole movement that had seized the Republican Party. And in it, he called them out for escalating nuclear arms, for opposing the Equal Rights Amendment, for opposing abortion, for supporting school prayer, and for their argument that if you weren't on their side, you were not patriotic. He also goes into a long rant about how they're exploiting religion for political purposes, and he thinks it's damaging Christianity as well as America. And then finally, he says, finally, persistent threats of racism lie directly below the surface of new right ideology. And then he goes into this whole rant about that. It's really extraordinary how, what Reagan was doing is coming back into vogue. I got a whole video about the whole thing over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. There we go. This is amazing. Frank Figliuzzi, he's a regular over on MSNBC, but he's a former FBI agent, special agent, I guess they call them. And he was participating in this conversation about the 15 boxes of top secret classified information that Donald Trump took down to Mar-a-Lago. And we don't know who he showed it to. We don't know how much of it has gone missing. We don't know how much he gave away. We don't know how much he sold. The original assumption was that somebody goofed, but now it's come out that these 15 boxes of top secret classified information were actually moved into the residence of the White House. Somebody had to pick them up and move them there so that the moving vans would then take them down to Mar-a-Lago. And we don't know who did that. But Figliuzzi is speculating that maybe he did this not because he wanted to just deliver this stuff to Vladimir Putin. I mean, he had undone our cybersecurity. He fired our cybersecurity czar and shut down the cybersecurity office in the White House in the last year of his presidency, which allowed the Russians to come in and set up home inside the computers of the Treasury Department that we know of, and what we don't know is where else. But Figliuzzi is thinking maybe he did it for the money. Fascinating. What do you think? Also, our geeky science for the day. This is absolutely fascinating. Oncologist and geneticist Ami Bhatt was intrigued by this. Now, this is way back at the beginning of COVID. Was intrigued by the fact that people were throwing up and getting diarrhea from COVID, which is supposed to be a respiratory tract infection. Usually you don't get diarrhea from the common cold, which is a respiratory tract infection. So what's going on? So he started taking stool samples from people who had COVID. And then thousands of years away, another guy, this was at Stanford, Bhatt was, I believe he was in India. At Stanford, Timon Adolf was puzzled by gut symptoms in infected people. Oh, this is the Medical University of Innsbruck in Austria. He started to assemble specimens too, GI tissue biopsies. It's from colonoscopies and stuff like that. And the piece over at Nature.com says, 2 years into the pandemic, the scientist's foresight has paid off. The pieces of the SARS-CoV-2 can linger in the guts for months after an initial infection. The findings add to a growing pool of evidence supporting the hypothesis that persistent bits of virus, non-virus ghosts, Bhatt has called them, could contribute to the mysterious condition called long COVID. This is absolutely fascinating. I mean, there is so much we still don't know about this virus. And yet Donald Trump just unleashed it on the American public. Australia is very much like the United States. Same language, very similar political system, very similar, economic dynamics, about the same size middle class, all that kind of stuff. Australia, if Australia had been the same population in the United States and they had done what Donald Trump did, 900,000 Australians would have died, or to phrase it correctly, Had Donald Trump done what Australia did in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, 900,000 Americans would still be alive, and they wouldn't be fighting long COVID. The ones who survived. It's incredible. A lot on the table here. I'll pick up your phone calls on the other side of the break. It's 27 minutes past the hour here on your media support group for We the People.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Exposing the con and conservative right here, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. We'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. The subtitle, Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. This is from the introduction titled Walking in Memphis. When he was 9 years old, my godson developed a brief but freakishly intense obsession with Elvis Presley. He took to singing Jailhouse Rock at the top of his voice with all the low crooning and pelvis jiggling of the king himself. He didn't know this style had become a joke, so he offered it with all the heart-catching sincerity of a preteen who believes he's being cool. In the brief pauses before he started singing it all over again, he demanded to know everything about Elvis. And so I jabbered out the rough outline of that inspiring, sad, stupid story. Elvis was born in one of the poorest towns in Mississippi, a place far, far away, I said. He arrived in the world alongside his twin brother, who died a few minutes later. As he grew up, his mother told him that if he sang to the moon every night, his brother could hear his voice. So he sang and sang. He began to perform in public just as television was taking off. So in a sudden swoosh, he became more famous than anyone had ever before been. Everywhere Elvis went, people would scream until his world became a chamber of screams. He retreated into a cocoon of his own construction where he gloried in his possessions in place of his lost freedom. For his mother, he bought a palace and named it Graceland. I skimmed through the rest, the descent into addiction, the sweating, gurning, stage jammering in Vegas, the death at the age of 42. Whenever my godson, who I'll call Adam, I've changed some details here to avoid identifying him, asked questions about how the story ended, I got him to duet Blue Moon with me instead. You saw me standing alone, he sang in his little voice, without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own. One day, Adam looked at me very earnestly and asked, Johann, will you take me to Graceland one day? Without really thinking, I agreed. Do you promise? Do you really promise? I said I did. And I never gave it another thought until everything had gone wrong. 10 years later, Adam was lost. He had dropped out of school when he was 15, and he spent literally almost all his waking hours at home alternating blankly between screens, his phone, an infinite scroll of WhatsApp and Facebook messages, and his iPad on which he watched a blur of YouTube and porn. At moments, I could still see in him traces of the joyful little boy who sang Viva Las Vegas, but it was like that person had broken into smaller, disconnected fragments. He struggled to stay with the topic of conversation for more than a few minutes without jerking back to his screen or abruptly switching to another topic. He seemed to be whirring at the speed of Snapchat, somewhere where nothing still or serious could reach him. He was intelligent, decent, kind, but it was like nothing could gain any traction in his mind. During the decade in which Adam had become a man, this fracturing seemed to be happening to some degree to many of us. The sensation of being alive in the early 21st century consisted of the sense that our ability to pay attention, to focus, was cracking and breaking. I could feel it happening to me. I'd buy piles of books and I'd glimpse them guiltily from the corner of my eye as I told myself, just one more tweet. I still read a lot, but with each year that passed, it felt more and more like running up a down escalator. I had just turned 40, and wherever my generation gathered, we would lament our lost capacity for concentration, as if it was a friend who had vanished one day at sea and never been seen since. Then one evening, as we lay on a large sofa, each staring at our own ceaselessly shrieking screens, I looked at Adam and felt a low dread. We can't live like this, I said to myself. Adam, I said softly, let's go to Graceland. What? I reminded him of the promise that I had made to him so many years before. He couldn't even remember those blue moon days, nor my pledge to him. But I could see that the idea of breaking this numbing routine ignited something in him. He looked up at me and asked if I was serious. I am, I said, but there's one condition. I'll pay for us to go 4,000 miles. We'll go to Memphis and New Orleans. We'll go all over the South, anywhere you want. But I can't do it if when we get there, all you're going to do is stare at your phone. You have to promise to leave it switched off except at night. We have to return to reality. We have to connect with something that matters to us. He swore he would, and a few weeks later, we lifted off from London Heathrow toward the land of the Delta Blues. When you arrive at the gates of Graceland, there's no longer a human being whose job is to show you around. You're handed an iPad, and you put in little earbuds, and the iPad tells you what to do. Turn left, turn right, walk forward. In each room, the iPad, in the voice of some forgotten actor, tells you about the room you're in, and a photograph of it appears on the screen. So we walked around Graceland alone, staring at the iPad. We were surrounded by Canadians and Koreans and the whole United Nations of blank-faced people looking down, seeing nothing around them. I watched them as they walk, feeling more and more tense. Occasionally, somebody would look away from the iPad, and I felt a flicker of hope, and I'd try to make eye contact with them to shrug, to say, hey, we're the only ones looking around. We're the ones who traveled thousands of miles. The book Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. The recent killing of a young black man in Michigan, Patrick Loyola, who was, the police officer was sitting on his back and put a gun right to the back of his head and shot him, is just the latest example of police killing people out of traffic stops, and predominantly black people. 28% of the people who are killed in traffic stops are black, but African Americans are only 13% of our population. Police in the United States have killed nearly 600 people during traffic stops since 2017. Mapping Police Violence is the nonprofit that's been doing the work on this. About 10% just this year, about 10% of the 1,100 people killed by police this year have been killed at traffic stops. Dante Wright, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, we know their names and we know their stories, but we're not doing enough to get this under control. Other countries tend not to have this problem. We need to do something now. There's a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. Elena Kagan wrote an absolutely scathing dissent to today's 6-3 decision in the Supreme Court, where the 6 conservatives on the court expanded Citizens United. This is what Justice Kagan wrote. She said, political contributions. Let me back up. Here's what happened. Ted Cruz loaned his own campaign $260,000. After the election was over, and he had won, and by the way, the limit to the amount that you can loan your own campaign is $250,000. So he went $10,000 over, probably just to provoke this Supreme Court challenge. After the campaign was over, he went to his donors and said, I'm your senator. I just won. I loaned myself $260,000. I'd like you to donate $260,000 to my campaign so I can pay myself back. Now, this would be a way for Ted Cruz to say to his donors, you want to give me money that I know, that you and I both know is going to end up directly in my pocket? Here's how to do it. Give me a campaign contribution so I can pay back my own loan to my own campaign. So that's what happened. Here's what Elena Kagan had to say about it. Justice Kagan, quote, political contributions that will line a candidate's own pockets given after his election to office pose a special danger of corruption. The candidate has a more than usual interest in obtaining the money to replenish his personal finances and is now in a position to give something in return. The donors well understand this situation and are eager to take advantage of it. In short, everyone's incentives are stacked to enhance the risk of dirty dealing. She goes on to say, post-election donors can be confident that their money will enrich a candidate personally. And those donors have, of course, learned which candidate won. So when they give money to repay the victor's loan, they know, not merely hope, that he will be in a position to perform official favors. The recipe for quid pro quo corruption is thus in place. A donation to enhance the candidate's own wealth, the quid, made when he has become able to use the power of public office to the donor's advantage, the quo. The politician is happy, the donors are happy, the only loser is the public. It inevitably suffers from government corruption. In allowing those payments to go forward unrestrained, today's decision can only bring this country's political system into further disrepute. Amen. Absolutely amen. It's just mind-boggling. Okay, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Tony in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind?
Good afternoon.
Tony? Hey.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can. I'm listening.
I'm sorry. I'm 81 and I have a voice problem, but I just want to comment on the replacement theory. As an historian, and I was a professor at a university, I can tell you that about 90% of us white folks do not have bona fides, like most African Americans, to be called real Americans. The only people who have more are those with predominantly Native American blood, and maybe a few descendants of Puritans and Pilgrims and people who landed in Virginia, Jamestown.
Yep.
And it just outrages me what's happening to this country. One thing you mentioned, when people had trust in government, my grandfather was a top executive for a major Wall Street corporation during World War II and immediately after. And I can remember you telling me that he had to pay 90% tax. And incidentally, we did not inherit a lot. But he had to pay 90% tax on much of his income.
All right. That's why there were no billionaires before Reagan.
And he really didn't mind it, that was his duty as an American and all of that. And what's happened to this country in my adult lifetime it really saddens me.
Yeah, I'm with you, Tony. Tony, thank you. Thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing the wisdom of a history professor with us. Jose in Toledo, Ohio. Hey, Jose, what's up?
Well, it's just another sad weekend that we experienced with the mass shooting in Buffalo. And I just think that we all look back at the history of this country and we can know that the only thing that suffers the most is truth. That we cannot be honest with ourselves as a nation as to where we are and where we came from and what we did to get here. And I find that I think people have to be honest. And as I told many students, the toughest toughest thing to do is to be honest. We suffer from that so badly right now that we want to blame people of color like myself for all that goes wrong and replacing it with some theory that we're trying to replace white people. It's all just a rationale of lies. And until we come to the truth that when someone's trying to sell you a bill, it's for a reason.
Yeah.
And that's the same as where it's all a hustle game, and it's real easy to believe the hustle because the way they lace it and make it sound that yes, that's what it is, and you don't have to think about it anymore, and you're shed free of all the guilt and responsibility that this country will have to carry on its back at some time, if it ever wants to truly be a progressive nation.
Yeah, I am with you, Jose. I mean, ask your average white person walking around in America, how long have your people been in this country? I can tell you my grandfather and grandmother on my father's side came to this country in 1917. So I mean, who has the longer claim? My mother's family have been here longer, but I think that's probably true of most white people. But if you ask black people, yes, they can trace their ancestors way back. Well, many of them can't because of the horrors of slavery, but their ancestors came here much, much earlier than that. Native people, Hispanic people have been in the North American continent for literally forever. I mean, in terms of human, 20, 30,000 years. And all of a sudden you got Tucker Carlson, the Pillsbury Doughboy running around going, oh yeah, they want to replace me, or they want to replace us, or I mean, it's not even logical. Jose, thank you. Linda in Fresno, California. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. By the way, I think that's what happened to those missing vaccinations. Remember?
What do you mean?
Oh, he probably sold them for profit.
Oh, Donald Trump, yes. It could be.
Well, the subject I was talking about, the disgusting Republican Party and the morbidly rich. And I think that's especially why Elon Musk wanted Twitter back, because they know they have to win 2022, and they'll never have to pay their fair share of taxes ever again. Yeah. No, they're pulling out all the stops and promoting their wholly owned politicians. I mean, we're seeing it here in Oregon, with the attempts to promote even the Democrats like Kurt Schrader, who tried to blow up the Build Back Better bill, voted against it. They're promoting people like that, but especially the Republicans. It's terrible. Yeah, I think that's why they don't care about if Putin goes ahead and kills millions and millions. These rich people know there's no planet B, and there's no water. There won't be enough resources for our overpopulated planet. Yeah, there you go. Linda, thank you. Eric in Milwaukee. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind today?
Hello. Hi, Mr. Hartmann. Thanks for taking my call. Sure. I'd like to kind of date or predate a little bit of your, Hitler, Mein Kampf, even eugenics, to remind everyone that, ultimately white males in America are responsible for much of this. And we can go back to Mr. Woodrow Wilson, who hosted a showing, the premiere of Birth of a Nation in the White House. Yep. And Teddy Roosevelt, a hero of mine when I was a child, spoke of race suicide, which is the predecessor to the replacement theory in a sense, on the regular. Yep. He spoke about it often as well. Then you've got Nixon, who took the civil rights law and built a big mistrust in government and created the Southern, strategy and law and order, et cetera, essentially rolling the blame over to everybody but white males. Then Mr. Reagan, as you talked about, he often mentioned the welfare queens and all the things that he had done. And then we come to this, and even Mr. Clinton, when he was president, between welfare reform, 3 strikes, truth in sentencing, he went over to the other side and enabled those things. And really, I want to bring it to right now, Mr. Biden, and this horrible crime in Buffalo and what we're looking at. And you see a lot of people evading the fault of white men in general. And I really hope that he strikes a note, not only to be conciliatory to the black neighborhoods that are, constantly under attack by white males throughout their entire life, but that he actually literally reaches out to white males and white men and white America in general and helps us humanize these folks and realize
I think I think the group that needs to be reaching out to the white males who are associated with replacement theory is the FBI.
And white males, we need to reach out. We need to reach out to our own because we're in everybody's family.
Yeah, I get it. I'm not real high on empathy right now.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
45 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Tom in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, I just wanted to say love your work, but on the Second Amendment, isn't militias supposed to be under the authority of civilian government?
In what context?
As in they're supposed to be registered and can't do anything such as exercise their powers unless they're under, like, the governor's control or the civilian government.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, and regulated, by the way. It's why the word regulated is in the Second Amendment. In fact, it's the only place in the entire Constitution where the word regulated appears, is in the Second Amendment.
Ah, well, there you go. We got all these, it's funny because 5 years ago, white extremists were considered the number one terrorist threat in America. and were going to be listed as such. And then the Trump administration just took out that whole block of the Justice Department.
Really?
Yeah. They closed the domestic terrorism people that were looking at white extremists.
I didn't know that.
It was common knowledge. You can look it up.
I will have to. Thank you. Thank you for that, Tom. Interesting. Thank you very much. Rick in San Marcos, Texas. Is it Sam Marcos or San Marcos?
San Marcos.
Okay,
tomato, but it's Texasistan.
Okay, Texasistan. I love it. What's up?
Right here in the heart. So I hear Democrats talking about how we're so bad at messaging, both here on TV, et cetera. And part of the problem is that it's hard for us to boil down our message to a bumper sticker, to a black and white thing, because there are so many different aspects to it. You know, we are more nuanced than Republicans, especially at the policies, right? So it's hard to distill it down, to give it out into the sound bites that we think that we can do. We don't have the Frank Luntz who's able to just distill everything down into the death taxes or death panels, things like that. But I think the bigger problem is, and I learned this from you, for every 1 hour, you said, for every 1 hour of progressive talk, there is about 10 hours of right-wing hate radio, et cetera. And this was before, OAN, Newsmax, and Sinclair. Right? So now it's expanded. Well, if we don't we're competing against essentially an arena full of with a big PA system, and we're trying to shout through a paper cup connected to a string.
Yeah.
So my thought, and I've never heard anybody discuss it, is why aren't we going after a couple of our billionaires like the Tom Steyers or the Mark Cubans or something that have the money to fund a network like Rupert Murdoch did? We already have free speech.
4 years
TV.
ago, I wrote an open letter to Tom Steyer saying just that. At the time, Clear Channel was for sale for $1.2 billion. And that would have gotten him 900 radio stations all across the United States, more or less. And, no response.
Well, then I guess we need to go at it again, because we'll never get the messages out that we want. I hear the people talking on MSNBC and all the shows. The message is there. We just can't get it out. We don't have the network. So that's what we need.
I'm with you. Thank you, Rick. That was the idea of Air America Radio, and my op-ed in Common Dreams back in 2003 was it was the original business plan for Air America Radio. So I'm with you. I've been singing this song for a long time. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. Paul in Palatine, Illinois. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. You're on fire today. Thank you.
Thank you. What's up?
I heard the sixth scariest words I've ever heard, notwithstanding Reagan's 9, and they're 10 times more scary. 42 years ago, consonant with your story from Senator Packwood, that period of time, I was a tractor repairman at a new tractor factory, working a third shift, and I struck up a conversation with a gentleman who looked very clear-minded, and I said, we get onto the subject of prisons and the people that were getting killed in them. It was a very hot topic at that time, and I was making the point that a lot of people are dying innocently, and he said, there was only one innocent person.
Jesus?
Now, yes. Now, it has stuck with me for 42 years.
Yeah, I guess.
I'm trying to untangle the hermeneutics of it. I can't. But this abortion thing relates directly to the innocence of Christ, to the innocence of babies. to the misogyny. They lose their innocence at birth. It's a tangled mess I don't want to look at too closely, but there's a relationship.
That's an interesting
in
point.
The Christian faith that has evolved since at least 41 years ago.
Well, it goes way back
And
before that. I mean, the
probably
whole original sin thing is that we all came out of a woman, and therefore
well, there you
men
go.
have
There-
original sin as well.
I forget that.
Yeah, so I think, you know, to your point that you know, we're innocent until we're born, and then once we're born, you know, hey, you just popped out of a woman, so you must be contaminated with original sin. You are no longer innocent, and immediately in need of salvation, and all that other kind of stuff that, you know, goes along with that whole religious thing. Yeah, Paul, it's amazing stuff. Thank you, Paul. Shirley in Gladstone, Michigan. Hey, Shirley, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I'm calling regarding your earlier comments on Trump's handling of classified information, how he would tear it up. Was told that was not legal. He would continue to tear it up, flush it down the toilet, take it to Mar-a-Lago. How could he possibly be qualified to run this country again?
How can he not be in prison?
Merits alone.
I mean, you know, they're trying to get Edward Snowden back so they can throw him in jail. I mean, there's reality winner. I mean, it's like we have no shortage of people who have been prosecuted for mishandling classified data. I don't get why. Well, there actually is. There is a grand jury. There's a federal grand jury right now that that Merrick Garland has put together. It's within the Department of Justice that is investigating his handling of classified documents. So, I mean, this might be his Achilles heel. This might be the thing that brings him down.
I hope.
Yeah.
I mean, common sense alone tells you if he gets back in the White House, he will continue to do that.
Yes.
Common sense tells you that.
Yep.
I just don't understand this country sometimes.
Yep. Behaviors that are not punished, bad behaviors that are not punished by virtue of not being punished are essentially encouraged. Spot on. Shirley, thank you very much for that. Brian in Joliet, Illinois. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Belated happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
And, well, I wanted to reference the McCarthy witch trials of the 1950s. And even in 1932, you know, Albert Einstein fled Nazi Germany, and then he made statements to the effect Einstein did about the McCarthy witch hunts, witch trials, that it reminded him of Nazi Germany, and then the maniacal J. Edgar Hoover tried to get Einstein kicked out of the country, and he couldn't do that because he thought, well, this would look bad in world opinion if he did that. But the point is that McCarthy's right-hand man, a guy named Roy Cohen, apparently was at some point in time a tutor to Donald Trump. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, he was Trump's dad's lawyer, then he was Trump's lawyer, and he was Trump's mentor in many regards. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, McCarthy, obviously a fascist himself, taught Trump, the fascist, to pretty much use the same tactics and strategies. And they, in these witch trials, they even, have you ever heard of Studs Terkel?
Oh, yes. In fact, I've got a quote. He's been on my program a number of times. He's been dead for a while now, but his last book, Hope Dies Last, he was on about that. I've got a clip of him somewhere around here of him saying that. Yes, I knew Studs Terkel.
Yeah, even after Studs, he had a TV show called Studs Place and got knocked off the air. He was never a communist. He was a New Deal.
He supported
Democrat.
labor unions was his big thing, you know, and he was a journalist out of Chicago. Yep, Brian, spot on. Thank you very much for all that. David in Alvin, Texas. Is that right, David?
Yeah, Tom. Good stuff.
Got a little less than a minute here, David. You got a quick one?
I'll make it quick. I was just I live in a crazy Republican area, but for the Ted Cruz deal, I thought that would help the Democrats get their money back, because as they start these campaigns, you know, they were only able to put in $250,000. If they put in $500,000, they can only get $250 back. So I think it hurt in certain areas. It hurts the the challenger, so the incumbent being the Republican, the Democrat goes and he puts 250 in or puts 500,000. He's way behind.
Or a Republican.
Already.
Yeah, any corrupt politician can loan money to their own campaign, and apparently now there's no limit given the Supreme Court, and then they can go to their donors and say, hey, I have political power now. This isn't speculation. This isn't I might win the election and I'll help you out. This is I already won the election and I can help you out. So help me pay off my campaign debt. And that money, of course, goes right into their own pocket. It's a backdoor way of bribery, as Elena Kagan pointed out today, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The hidden history of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at hartmanreport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
It was first published in 1993. This is from Chapter 1, titled Detoxing. Today's revolutionary need is to detox ourselves from the old, stereotyped political formulas from 20 or 30 years ago, without which we cannot deal with neocolonialism. A while ago, I was watching a Malcolm X Day program, and the main speaker ended by militantly reciting Malcolm X's famous phrase, "the ballot or the bullet." Haven't you caught the same thing? X, most fresh of all thinkers, is being turned into the equivalent of Lenin or Mao's corpse on ceremonial display. For when X threw down that slogan a generation ago, it was then timely and on point. Black people were struggling for freedom against colonial conditions, and most had neither the ballot nor the bullet. The militant question was which would be picked up. Now the black nation is struggling for its life against neo-colonial conditions, and new African people have lots of ballots and lots of bullets. Everywhere you have African city governments, African officials and African executives, African soldiers, African shooters, and African posses. You might say that the black nation is dying from too much ballots and bullets, but not radical enough truths, perhaps. Under colonialism, the oppressed were largely kept disarmed. Now it's all reversed. Imperialism as a neo-colonial system races not to disarm, which is hopeless in this age, but to arm the oppressed in its own way, whether it's posses or paratroopers, children included, naturally. Feminists say women should get self-defense. Does that threaten imperialism? Then why is Smith & Wesson making the Ladysmith, the .38 subnose specially sized for women? Is the government of white men doing anything to stop women from owning handguns, the ranks of white women who've done So are over 15 million in climbing. Be real. In the Ivory Coast and Somalia, men and boys in rags and bare feet have AK-47s and grenades. In New York and Los Angeles, kids too young for learner's permits got Raven 258 or a Deuce, or maybe even a TAC-9. What's the firepower of the old Black Liberation Army compared to the Crips in Compton or the Jamaica posses just in Flatbush? Get the Uzi is successful slang because it plays off reality we all know. More than a few new African children say personally they got to be more afraid of black people than white people. So how useful is the liberal left habit of playing low to the crowd with old anti-colonial rhetoric? It used to be that dissing the white man was a crime or close to it, dangerous for sure, like life-threatening if a black man or woman did it. Now it's so tame that Fox or ABC give it to us as a sitcom. There's even some college courses on how to diss the white man. He may not like it, but who cares? Imperialism doesn't care, that's for sure. Even white women are doing it now as a substitute for doing anything real. It's like running in place. As Rodney, the Guyanese revolutionary scholar, pointed out, it's counterproductive to solve the neo-colonial situation, or counterproductive to solving the neo-colonial situation. Revs still cling to the old ideas and ways, in part because we don't want to admit how ignorant we are now. This runs deeper, though. Anti-colonial politics are the culmination of 400 years of our struggle. They are the products of the best minds we had, of destroying old societies, of oppressed people challenging the world in uprisings, pushing farther and farther. These old views are already fully developed, well-honed. More than that, the old anti-colonial politics are developed in the most profound sense, in having been widely diffused and taken hold of by the oppressed, put to use already. So when Revs talk about that old talk, walk that old walk, it's not only familiar, but reassuring and to a certain degree popular. We all take for granted now that the anti-colonial consciousness and changes. It's become the normal. That's what's our due. A few years ago, Nelson Mandela was the most famous terrorist POW in the world. In 1990, when he made his triumphant visit here, he was not only greeted by massive crowds of well-wishers, but schools and churches throughout the black nation held special programs to honor him. City governments and the U.S. Congress itself had to organize welcomes for him. Like it or not, white men had to smile and applaud him. And last year, by any means necessary T-shirts with Malcolm's picture on them were more common in many streets than Budweiser T-shirts. And you can't take it to mean anything extreme or radical. The old anti-colonial awareness has already been generalized widely, absorbed by people and society itself into daily life. So let's break that down. When a tiny Klan faction based in North Carolina to the U.S. Capitol from a rally on Labor Day weekend 1990, it took over 2,000 cops in riot gear to hold the angry crowds back. The D.C. New African community was outraged that any Klan dared to march in their city, which is 70% black, on their territory. Ephi Berry, the then wife of the then mayor, Marion Berry, came out and brought her 10-year-old son. "I'm overwhelmed," she said. The book is Night Vision, Illuminating War and Class of the Neocolonial Terrain by Butch Lee and Red Rover, first published in 1993.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. Today, on this day in history, May 16th, 1972, a day that will live in infamy, interesting stuff was going on in Michigan. I lived in Michigan in 1972 on this day in history, and I remember this quite well. My dad was a Republican activist, as it were, kind of a modest activist. I mean, he wasn't, foaming at the mouth or anything, but he was there. And Richard Nixon was going to get Nixon was the president. He'd been elected in 68. He was going to be reelected in 72. I mean, that was still in question, but it's what happened. And Michigan had what are called open primaries. Now, there's two ways that states can do primary elections, open or closed. And in a closed primary, for example, here in Oregon, I'm registered as a Democrat. So if I wanted to vote in the Republican Party primary here in Oregon, I would have to re-register as a Republican because it's a closed primary. I can't just vote wherever I happen to want to vote. Michigan, though, was then, I don't know if it still is, was then an open primary state. And so the Republicans, knowing that Nixon was going to be their nominee, there was no race in 72 in the Republican primary, which was happening at the same time the Democratic primary was. So all the Republicans showed up and voted in the Democratic primary. And in doing so, and by the way, it wasn't just Michigan, they did the same thing in Maryland, which was also an open primary state. And that was also on this day, on May 16th. The exact same result came out, and that was that George Wallace won the Democratic primary vote in Michigan and in Maryland, principally with Republican votes. This is, Nixon was the nominee. There was nothing going on the Republican side. So, just wanted to flag that for you. The history of the Republican Party engaging in dirty tricks and trying to mess with Democrats is a long one. Somebody called a little earlier and said, Trump shut down the office, the FBI's office that was looking into racial terrorism in the United States. I said I didn't know the details of that. We looked that up during the break. Actually, Sean looked it up during the break. Thank you for that, Sean. And this is what we found, was that under President Obama, first of all, Obama created an Office of Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention within the White House. It had a $24 million a year budget. It had 40 full-time employees and a bunch of part-time people. Donald Trump came into office and he notified the Homeland Security Department that they wanted to, quote, reorient programs meant to combat violent extremism to focus more on the threat posed by radical Islam. Because, Trump was trashing Muslims. So stop looking at those white supremacists. And he scaled the program from 40 full-time staffers and a $24 million annual budget looking at white supremacist extremism in the United States, changed it to look at Muslim extremism in the United States, cut it down to 10 full-time employees, and reduced its budget to $3 million. And here we are. Obviously, white supremacist extremism has been a thing in the United States forever. But I would like to take this conversation, as it were, perhaps even just one step farther. And that is to suggest that the next civil war in the if the United States is going to have a second civil war, it's not going to be a regional thing. A civil war in the United States is not going to be the North against the South. It's not going to be Maryland against Virginia. It's not going to be Michigan versus Ohio, or pick your states. It's not going to be Idaho versus Oregon. It's going to be what we saw this weekend. It's going to be stochastic terrorism. It's going to be so-called lone wolves who are actually part of a much larger community. Part of it, now tied into gamer communities. Part of it tied into specific websites. Large parts of it coming out of social media. And it's going to be the assassination of people of color or right to abortion advocates, or, pick your topic that people are willing to kill over. But I think mostly it's going to revolve around race, and it's going to be white people killing black people, white people killing Hispanic people, white people killing gay people. We've got the Buffalo shooter this week. You had the shooter down in Southern California. Killing Hispanics. You had the shooter in Florida at the Pulse nightclub shooting gay people. This is, in my opinion, what civil war in the 21st century in America looks like. And if you think that these people have not declared war on the rest of us, you're missing something. This is a civil war. And if we don't get smart about it, if we don't wake up to this as a nation, and I'm talking to you white people, if we don't get smart about this and wake up to this, we're gonna discover one day that Pastor Niemöller was right, far more right than any of us thought. Only, let's rephrase it, right? First they came for the Muslim terrorists, first they came for the black people, then they came for first they came for the Native Americans, actually, then they came for the black people, then they came for the Hispanic, then, and now they're going to come for you. When anybody is not free, everybody is not free. There's no other way to say it. There's no other way to identify it. So there's that. Also, serious stuff coming out of the U.S., or not the U.S. conflict with Russia, but the Russian conflict with Ukraine. 3 quick points I wanted to make and share with you, and then we'll get to your phone calls. The first is that the Ukrainian head of Ukraine's military intelligence he's a major general by the name of Kyrylo Budanov, told Sky News that Putin has blood cancer, is dying, and is about to be removed by his own people, that there's a coup underway that nobody can stop. Now, take this, consider the source here. This is the head of military intelligence for Ukraine saying this. So, I take that with a huge grain of salt, but this is not the first time we've heard this, number one. Number two, the G7 just had a meeting this last week. And the German foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, hosted this meeting, and in fact, it held in a small town in Germany. And this is the G7. This is Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United States. And she pointed out, and I'm quoting, up to 50 million people, particularly in the countries of Africa and the Middle East, will die in the next few months unless ways are found to release Ukrainian grain, which accounts, end of quote, which accounts for 10% of the world's grain supply and about 40% of the grain, particularly wheat, that is consumed in the Middle East and Africa. This is a big deal. Canada's foreign minister, Melanie Joly, said that her country, another major agricultural exporter, wants to help Ukraine export the wheat that they have already grown. See, Ukraine right now can't export wheat because the Russians keep bombing their ports. And Canada's like, okay, we'll supply ships. We've just got to have some safety here. Canada's foreign minister, Melanie Joly, said, we need to make sure that these cereals are sent to the world. If not, millions of people will be facing famine. So there's that consequence of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And now we're hearing that Russia may have lost as many as a third of their ground combat forces in Ukraine to the Ukrainian military. And this is starting to puncture the information bubble in Russia. The United Kingdom's Defense Ministry, this from The Hill, piece by Ola Huffman Ocean. The United Kingdom's Defense Ministry said that Russia has likely lost 1/3 of its ground combat forces in Ukraine during the 3 months into the war. In the Twitter thread on Sunday, the minister added that Moscow's forces in the Donbas region have lost their momentum and fallen behind schedule. They've deployed as many as 150,000 troops, but 40,000 Russian troops have been killed, captured, gone missing, or taken prisoner. 40,000. And they have now retaken Kharkiv, and they have now, the Ukrainians have now pushed themselves all the way back up to the Russian border around that town. So this is a very, very tough situation, and it looks like Russia is losing. How's this going to play out? I'll be back with your calls on the other side of the break at 16 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So a lot on the table here to discuss. We'll pick up your calls right after this. And welcome back, Robert in Bainbridge Island, Washington. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Good to talk with you.
It says here you disagree with me. What's up?
I agree with you in general. Just got back from being out of the country, though, and the observation at this moment is that I think you continue to be a very important voice, similar to Cassandra, if you know what I mean, warning of things that are very important. But I wanted to say, as a public health researcher and neuroscientist, I really urge you to think carefully about saying you don't have empathy at this time. Several calls back, someone was saying white males are a large part of the problem, or the majority of the problem. It's very true. But encouraging them to fight is not always a great strategy. B.F. Skinner a long time ago said that punishment is never effective, really.
B.F. Skinner, who raised his daughter in a box?
No, he did that. Hey, Tom, I'm glad you brought that up. He did not. He put her in there when he wanted her to be dry and warm, but played with her, and she's now a very successful commercial.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that straightened up. My point, Robert, is that we have had a lot of years in this country to sit around and psychoanalyze and empathize with and feel sorry for white people who want to kill black people. I am not willing to waste my time on that any longer from the point of view of, oh, you poor people, you poor misunderstood people. I think they should be put in prison.
Well, I agree with you that they need to be subject to what's called counter control. But if you observe carefully, you'll notice the more aggression showed by either side, the more there's counter aggression, and it becomes underground and difficult to control.
But that's no reason not to have police agencies doing their police job, which is to keep the rest of us safe.
I agree with you completely, and that's really not punishment. That's really social influence, and it's done best by a positive approach of finding the people doing the right, and the ones that are not doing right, they need to be interacted with. There's no doubt about that. But this civil war you're talking about, believe me, it's not something to encourage, is it?
Oh, I'm not trying to encourage it. What I'm saying is that these folks have declared war on us. And, this goes way back. This goes back to the killing of what was his name? The talk show host in Denver back in the day.
Yes. Yes.
Alan Berg. These guys have been, they declared war on America a long, long time ago. And
listen. Though I want to say, Tom, it was way before that the enemy of the people was attacked in Norway. You know what I'm talking about?
Anders Breivik.
Yeah, and his brother and his daughter lost her job, and they were thrown out of their house by people that were fighting with punishment. It's not a winning strategy, and that. By the way, that doctor's name I think was Hartman, wasn't it?
I'm sorry, Robert, you're fading out here.
I'm sorry, I hate to do that. But.
Yeah, no, I get it totally, Robert. I just, I'll say it again. The time for, in my opinion, or at least from my perspective, the time for understanding these poor, tender little white racists is past. I do understand them. I grew up with some of these people. I know them. I know how they think. And it's time to publicly shame them, and when they take the smallest action in this direction, to put them in jail. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Have you noticed that people are basically imitating Donald Trump all over the country? We're seeing all this rude behavior, sexist, racist behavior. People getting arrested at airport gates, airplanes being turned around because people are fighting with flight attendants, disorderly, rude, unhinged conduct. I mean, it's just gone nuts. Car crashes are up, gun deaths are up, shootings are up. Healthcare workers are being literally physically assaulted in some hospitals. They're having to put together panic buttons. This kind of behavior in our schools is increasing. It looks like, according to some sociologists, psychologists, and even business consultants, it looks like a lot of this ties back not just to the Trump presidency, with Donald Trump providing us with an example of how to be, an obnoxious person, but also the crisis of the pandemic. We've got a deeper dive into this topic over at ThomHartmann.com. There's a great video about it. You can check it out there. We're back 23 minutes past the hour. Mary in Sunrise Beach, Missouri. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
I'm going to turn my speakerphone. Yes. The reason I called in is when you were talking about the Second Amendment, you used the word regulated.
Yes, it's in the Second Amendment.
Militia. And actually, I believe the Second Amendment reads well-regulated militia.
Correct.
And as far as Ed Snowden goes, I think his conscience got the better of him. And I think he was extremely brave. I mean, he's like the second Daniel Ellsberg in my book.
I agree. And
then my third thing is...
we need strong whistleblower laws in this country, frankly.
Amen. And you know what? He was so smart. He planned it out just right. But anyway, my other thing, since I have so much time, I went down floating up the river here at the Lake of the Ozarks with my boyfriend yesterday. Mm-hmm. And he's big into the, environment. He has a recycle center, blah, blah, blah. But he always says there's too many people on the planet. That's one of his things. And he always puts a sign up in front of his recycle center. And I said, you need to change the letters and make it read Earth, love it or leave it.
Yeah.
But anyway, last night when they started reporting all the mass shootings, I told them, I said, well, you say there's too many people on the planet, so
this is not a solution to too many people on the planet.
I don't really care about mass killings anymore. I mean,
I do, and I do, Mary. I'm sorry, I'm just not going to go there. That's disgusting, frankly. Kevin in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I just think it's interesting that we had peaceful protests out in front of Supreme Court justices' homes, and Congress, just like that, was able to pass legislation to get them better security.
Yeah, which is weird because there's regular protests outside Chuck Schumer's home and have been for years.
Yeah, but just the quickness with which they did that.
I know.
And here we have 4 mass shootings, Buffalo, California, Houston, 7 people got shot here in North Carolina. How quickly is Congress going to move to protect our security?
Right.
I doubt they won't move as fast as they will to protect Clarence Thomas and Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah. I get it, Kevin.
But, just as an African American, I think what ultimately what needs to happen, and I doubt that it will, is that we need more people like Liz Cheney. She put out a tweet today where she basically called them out and said House leadership has enabled and embraced white supremacy, and they need to renounce it.
Yep.
And you talked earlier about how this needs to be called out. And leadership like Liz Cheney, she's doing it.
And Kevin McCarthy has said not one word, or at least as of the time that I went on the air, he hadn't responded to any of this.
And Liz Cheney is now considered an outsider.
Yeah.
Because she's telling the truth.
Oh, they're primarying her in Wyoming. I mean, they're coming after her. You've got people bringing millions of dollars into the state to try and take her down. How dare she?
But Yeah, but it starts with leadership, and you need more leaders like Liz Cheney calling this stuff out, calling a spade, and saying we need to flush this out of our party. Period.
Yeah, and let's acknowledge the first step though is it's like sort of like AA. You know, the first step is acknowledging that you've got a problem, and the Republican Party is refusing to even acknowledge that they have a problem. So where do you go with that one? Chris, thanks a lot for the call. We're in the break here. We'll be right back. Stick around. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Picking up your calls on the other side of the break here on your media support group for We the People. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stokely, A Life by Peniel E. Joseph. This is from the preface. Stokely Carmichael is a troubling icon of America's civil rights years. His Black Power call became a national Rorschach test. Whereas many blacks viewed it as righteous, many whites saw violent foreboding. Newspapers brooded over Carmichael's words, quickly forming a consensus that judged the slogan to be at best intemperate and at worst a blatant call for anti-white violence and reverse racism. In 1966, Black Power reverberated around the world, galvanizing blacks, outraging whites, and inspiring a cross-section of ethnic and racial minorities. In 1969, Carmichael left the United States for Conakry, Guinea, where he reinvented himself as a roving Pan-Africanist organizer and professional revolutionary. For the next 30 years, he remained an energetic dissident, a throwback to the heady years of the 1960s. Carmichael turned the quest for black political power into his life's work. His faith in a style of politics many considered anachronistic came out of the same tenacity and stubbornness that once made him one of the most effective and controversial activists of his generation. These same qualities, however, limited Carmichael's efforts as a Pan-Africanist political mobilizer. Before leaving America, Stokely resigned as Black Power's glamorous enfant terrible. Telegenic, brash, equal parts angry and gregarious. Whether dressed in three-piece suits, leather jackets, sharecroppers' overhauls, or African dashikis, Carmichael became to represent the era's multifaceted identity, a hipster hero whose easy grace allowed him to consort effortlessly with both the dignified and the damned. The name Stokely Carmichael first came into my consciousness when I was a young boy coming of age in New York City. As the proud son of a Haitian mother who belonged to local 1199 Hospital Workers Union, part of SEIU, I grew up hearing stories of how civil rights activists, Black Power revolutionaries, Pan-Africanist freedom fighters, and trade unionists helped to shape a new world in America and beyond. By the time I was in elementary school, I was on my first picket line, accompanying my mother in support of an 1199 strike. Both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King supported 1199 during the 1960s. Stokely Carmichael's political importance came into sharper focus when I was in junior high after the premiere of the landmark PBS documentary series Eyes on the Prize, which featured the 24-year-old Carmichael's fiery Black Power speech and rightly characterized Stokely as his generation's heir to Malcolm X. Over the course of a decade of research on Carmichael, I would come to understand him as that and much more. Carmichael's youth, casual dress, and charisma made him an easily identifiable hero, one whose quick smile and passionate speeches left an indelible impression. An adopted son of the South by way of Trinidad, the Bronx, and Harlem, Stokely adapted while transforming whatever environment he encountered. As a native New Yorker growing up in the city's tense racial climate of the 1980s, I found Carmichael's survival instincts appealing. As a young graduate student in Philadelphia, I had the opportunity to hear him speak and briefly met him afterward. He encouraged me to stay committed to the Black freedom movement, a struggle he defined as infinite. With his flowing African robes, gray hair, and white beard, he looked like a prince. And he had changed his name. He was no longer Stokely Carmichael. As Malcolm Little had become Malcolm X and later El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Stokely had become Kwame Ture. It was a name that paid homage to his two African heroes, men who had been the first presidents of their countries, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and Guinea's Sékou Touré. Kwame Ture spelled the Guinean's name not as the French did, as white Europeans did, but as Arabs and Muslims did. Sékou Touré, S-E-K-U-T-U-R-E. As a college student, Carmichael helped transform America by organizing sit-ins, demonstrations, and voter registrations during the Civil Rights Movement's heroic years, a period that roughly encompasses the decade between the 1954 Brown v. Board Supreme Court decision, desegregation decision, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and has become enshrined in public memory through national holidays, films, commemorations, and monuments. Carmichael's deep sense of justice contributed to his evolution into Kwame Ture, the Pan-Africanist revolutionary and anti-capitalist organizer who moved to West Africa and remained tenacious in the face of searing political setbacks. Carmichael ultimately judged America incapable of creating the free and just world he had struggled for as a young man. But despite living in Africa for the final 30 years of his life, Carmichael's legendary stature as a black power activist lingered even if many ignored his lasting contributions to civil rights struggles that included a bruising quest for the vote in the Deep South. Although today largely forgotten, Stokely Carmichael remains one of the protean figures of the 20th century, a revolutionary who passionately believed in self-defense and armed rebellion, even as he revered nonviolence. The book Stokely, A Life, by Peniel L. Joseph. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Remember Paul Manafort? He used to be business partners with Roger Stone back in the day, working for Republican politicians like, Nixon and Reagan. And well, in 2004, he took a really sweet gig over in Ukraine, helping the Russians, President Putin, install Viktor Yanukovych as the president of Ukraine, a nice Putin puppet. That same year, though, the people of Ukraine said enough, and basically Yanukovych got driven out of the country. So they tried it again in 2010. Let's bring, this Putin puppet back into Ukraine, Yanukovych. And it worked until 2014 when they got kicked out. So he gets kicked out of Ukraine, Manafort. So what does he do the next year, 2015? He decides to run the Trump campaign. Are you starting to see a pattern here? Yeah, could be. Okay, there's an entire video that outlines this whole timeline over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back, 35 minutes past the hour. Chris in Austin, Texas. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to mention after the horror that happened in Brooklyn, I was raised a military brat. My dad was a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne, and every time, and military people have guns. That's a given. But the military was very strict about keeping a record of who had what gun. Every time we moved to a new post, the Army required that every gun was registered, serial numbers, the whole bit.
Right.
And
so are you suggesting, Chris, that that's how we should be dealing with guns nationwide? Civilians as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Absolutely.
Registration, license, and insurance. So the three things that we do with cars, if we did those with guns, I think it would clean up an awful lot of this problem. Chris, thank you. Very well said. Maureen in Geneva, Illinois. Hey, Maureen, what's up?
Well, I called about abortion, but since then I've thought about the food shortage. And it looks to me like America used to be the breadbasket of the world, but it hasn't been for a long time. But I guess we produce about 6% of the world's wheat and about 36% of the world's corn. Maybe the United States should quit worrying about ethanol and start switching to grain so that we can help feed the rest of the world while this war goes on.
It's not ethanol, Maureen, that's consuming the majority of that surplus grain of our grain. It's animals. We grow and we export massive amounts of soybean and other grains, particularly soybeans, that are used to feed cows and pigs. And if we all ate less meat, and therefore American agriculture could grow human edible grains as opposed to grains designed for animal feed, we might be able to take a dent out of this thing. But the step one,
that would be great.
Yes.
And I would encourage us doing that. But why not try right now to help save as many starving peoples as possible by doing like the military, using military areas in every state, turn that into growing grain and start producing this as soon as possible, because these people will be dying soon.
Yeah, I share your urgency, Maureen. I think that we're going. Well, we are seeing famines right now. I mean, there's a famine going on in Sudan. There's in South Sudan. I'm sorry, in Yemen. And we're on the edge of a famine in Ethiopia right now. I mean, it's just there are some severe crises all around the world, and
we don't need those steaks. We don't need that beef.
Right.
We need meat, all right, in our diets, but we don't need steaks, and we don't need
anything close to that amount. Absolutely, Maureen. Thank you very much. Mike in Anchorage, Alaska. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. What's on my mind is a reminder that Khrushchev in 1958 made the statement at the UN that Russia, we will take America without a shot. We will take you from within. You will drop like a ripe plum into our hand, and we will bury you. And that is very, when we see all this connection with politicians and Putin and all of this anti-democratic behavior, I just go back to that in my mind, that did he have a crystal ball?
Well, Putin is following the same strategy, divide and conquer.
Exactly.
I mean, this goes back as far as the history of warfare goes back.
But it's, he made that statement, and Putin is on track, and all of the Putin promoters are supporting that.
Yeah.
And it's very scary. And one other little thing about Ukraine. Several weeks ago, I watched President Zelensky say that he had told everybody, the West, what they really needed, and if they didn't get the kind of help they needed fairly soon at that point, it could be too little too late. And every time I think of that and see what's going on in Mariupol and all of those places, I think
it's already too little too late for
dithering,
and
it's just
and then Rand Paul holding this up for a whole week, the aid to Ukraine, and 50 more or less Republicans voting against it. It's the Putin caucus is growing in the Republican Party right now. It's growing rapidly. They've gone from 5 or 6 voting against aid to Ukraine to a dozen or so, to a couple of dozen, to about 50 now in last week, and now they've got a senator who's out there pushing this. So yeah, Mike, I'm completely with you. Thank you. William in Wimberley, Texas. Hey, William, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Listen, when you tell people the next civil war is going to be fought in a particular way, and here's why, you're promoting that war.
I'm saying that it's already been declared, William, and it is already being fought. people in America are being
You're saying
murdered.
We're in a war. All right, fine.
And what I'm saying is that the white supremacists out there what I'm saying is that long ago, the white supremacists, you could just pot William down. What I'm saying, William, is that long ago, the white supremacists declared war on the rest of America. And this is the form that it's taking. Back to you, William.
When David Dorn, the retired police captain, was shot in St. Louis during the 2020 riots or insurrections, did you call that an act of war?
I don't recall any 2020 riots or insurrections. There was 2021.
There was a huge riot in St. Louis, and a retired police captain, a black man, by the way, was shot by another black man on the street in the back of the head.
What's your point?
In the back of the head.
So you're gonna really do this? Another white guy calling up and saying, "Hey, let's talk about black on black violence. Isn't that really the issue here?" Is that what you're going to try, William? I'm not even going to bother with that. It's like this is. Yeah, you pushed my button. Paul in Somerville, Texas. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm getting a growing sense of dread back up to the 1/6 insurrection. And why has it taken so long to do something with Donald Trump? We saw him egg it all on, and now what they're doing is keep putting it off and putting it off.
I know.
Having in June they're going to have the public hearings. They're going to keep putting this off until the Republicans take over the House and Senate. They'll shut down all of the investigations, and we'll be in trouble.
I know, and that's the plan, Paul. I mean, this is the Republican plan is to completely go with, overthrowing democracy in the United States, end democracy. You've got 19 states now that are changing their election laws to either make it harder to vote or to make it legal for the state to ignore the votes of its voters and choose whoever they want for the Electoral College. You've got in over maybe it's over 50. I'm certain it's more than 30 cases. You've got people running for public office as Republicans right now, claiming it for positions where they would be in a position to handle votes, from Secretary of State down to county election commissions, proclaiming that they are going to participate in stealing an election on behalf of Donald Trump. You've got people who hate democracy. You got people like, the idiot who called just a minute ago saying, oh, no, the real problem here isn't white supremacists killing black people. The real problem is black people killing black people. Let's talk about that. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. It's, I don't know. I'm sometimes I reach the point where it's just like, well, I'll just leave it right there, Paul. It's a frustrating day. Paul, thank you for the call. We need to clearly identify the fact that right-wing media and the Republican Party are promoting white terrorism in this country. We need to claim it and point it out.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The Department of Justice and the FBI need to be doing more about it. I realize Trump cut their program by more than 3/4, but we need to do something. Johan in Los Angeles. Hey, Johan, welcome to the program. What's on your mind?
Yeah, people are talking about some replacement theory and from the Buffalo shooting and everything.
Right.
And you and I know that this has been going on for a while, but I think this is a right-wing movement for population control. And one of the main right-wing guys, Ben Wattenberg, pointed it out that what's coming down the road at us demographically is asking for some extra trouble, and it is inflicted. And tell young white males to...
Is he the guy who wrote the book, The Birth Dearth? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, back in the 80s.
He uses the young white males to, if they decide not to have children, or postpone childbearing until the opportunity runs out, they'll live to be very sorry.
Right.
Yeah, they're using this to kill all the non-white populations right now all over the country, and law enforcement doesn't do anything right now.
Well,
to put them in prison.
I think that's a slight exaggeration, but we are not dealing with this issue, and we have never dealt with this issue with the urgency it deserves. We completely reorganized our police agencies after 9/11 in response to Muslim terrorism. But we've got a much bigger problem in this country with white supremacist terrorism.
Right.
And, you know, it's just, they're doing nothing. Well, yes, they're doing something about it, but we have not, as a nation, I mean, you know, we had memorials, we had events, we had, you know, television programs, we had investigations, I mean, just massive amount of stuff around, oh my God, some Muslims attacked us. And, you know, sadly, the us increasingly, or traditionally, I suppose, has not included minorities in the United States. And so the media coverage is like all weirdly skewed around it. But yeah, Johan, thank you. Chris in Seattle. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I have to agree with Paul on we're very frustrated that Trump is able to go behind the scenes to do whatever he wants to do to try to get control of our country and remove our democracy. And I'm wondering if you've heard of anything about the 14th Amendment since he did the January 6th insurrection about that he can never hold office again because of that. It's Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
Right.
Saying
it requires a conviction. That's the problem.
What's the problem?
You have to convict somebody of trying to overthrow the government before you can prevent them from serving in public office under the 14th Amendment.
Saw everything. We're getting so much info behind, you know, the scenes of text and everything. And can't they? What are they trying to get? How much more can they get?
Well, I think that this is going to be a hotter discussion, Chris, after the January 6th committee is done laying out their, you know, what they've discovered to the American public, which is going to be happening fairly soon. Chris, I got to run, but thank you for the call. I share your frustration. I would like to see Donald Trump held to account for his crimes. Not the least of them, 900,000 unnecessary dead Americans. We'll be right back. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find Are you books. Tired of... The American Lung Association just came out with an amazing new study where they took Joe Biden's goal of a zero-emission power grid by 2035 and zero-emission passenger vehicles across the United States by 2035, which is a ways down the road, and trucks and buses being zero emission by 2040, and said, okay, what'll happen if we do this? They discovered that over 100,000 lives would be saved, people who wouldn't be getting cancer and COPD and asthma and all these kind of things. Over $1.2 trillion in public health costs would be avoided, and just massive, and 2.8 million fewer asthma attacks, among other public health problems. They note how extraordinary this would be, what a huge and positive impact it would have on America's public health, and how it's completely doable. The American Lung Association. The one note they say is that, quote, opposition from Republicans and 2 key Democratic senators makes it easier said than done. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. 9 minutes before the hour. Michael in Pensacola, Florida. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I'm calling about the hypocrisy of, do you remember last, well, actually, it was shortly after the election when the people that were counting the votes in all these different states had, like, people harassing them and walking around their front lawns and looking in their window.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
how come it's okay if they do that, but the Supreme Court can't? If you do that to them, it's a whole different situation.
I agree with you, Michael. In my opinion, free speech is free speech, and the way that they, if people are offended by demonstrations outside Beer Bong Brett's house or Amy's house or whatever, then
right. And they're looking in the windows of these people's houses. It's
well, with regard to the voting, yeah, the protesters, the Supreme Court protesters, have been very polite. They've been staying on the sidewalk. They have not. I don't think they've been intimidating. But yeah, I'm with you, Michael. There's considerable hypocrisy there. Orlando in Stockton, California. Hey, Orlando, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I was just on. I really enjoy your show and appreciate what you do. I just wanted to talk about how, I grew up in Missouri, and I can remember going to school in Kirksville, Missouri at the Truman State. And I had people in my family who were concerned about me traveling to Missouri to go to school in Kirksville because at that time, if you remember, there was this insurgence or growth of these paramilitary groups in Missouri. And I can remember when Branson became kind of almost like a rallying cry, almost a capital for them in Missouri where they would meet. And you'd have all these kind of like conservative ideologues coming to Branson, Missouri to enjoy themselves, as well as you had this kind of like fear growing in Missouri of these paramilitary groups, just kind of speaking to what you were talking about earlier, how this has been a growing concern in this country for a long time. And a lot of times it seems like you have police with these same ideas that have been embedded within the police, and it seems like you don't really get much traction on this, addressing these issues and eliminating these ideologies in this country because it seems like it's grown to be so interwoven in the fabric of the conservative ideas and various departments in our country.
The idea of what, white supremacy you're talking about?
Yeah, the idea of white supremacy, and how it has grown and how it's inundated within various police departments throughout the country. And I've heard you speak about this, and even the FBI director, has shown a great deal of concern about these ideas that are permeating within the police department. And a lot of this stuff started with in the 80s with a lot of these paramilitary groups and a lot of these individuals. They joined police forces, they joined military, they joined all types of, executive branch areas of force. And I believe that's what we're dealing with today. It is the kind of like the result of not paying attention to what was happening almost 40 years ago.
I agree. And you're absolutely right. There has been a concerted effort by white supremacists to essentially infiltrate military and police agencies. Number one, to spread the gospel. Number two, to get training on how to kill people. Number three, to simply, get a good job and use the power of the state to be able to beat up or even kill black people. I mean, it's all of the above. So yeah, spot on, Orlando. Thank you. Rick in Seattle. Hey, Rick, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. This is the first time I've called you, and I've been listening to you for 20 years.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. The two things I wanted to say is I believe that Republicans are regressive, and so that's what they should be called instead of conservatives, and Democrats are more conservative. And the other thing is I think the Republican Party should be abolished because it's not good for society.
Mm-hmm. I don't think we should abolish it. I do think that we need to tell the truth about it. That the Republican Party is basically a party of grifters and hustlers and con artists that has been heavily infiltrated. Actually, they welcomed the white supremacists and racists. That was the essence of Nixon's Southern strategy.
And for that reason, I think their legitimacy should be challenged.
Yeah. No, I agree in as a metaphor or intellectually. I think that if we were to if we could snap our fingers and the Republican Party no longer existed, I'm not, there would just be another vessel that would come along for the white supremacists. But I get your point, Rick. I absolutely get your point. Jeff in Gurnee, Illinois. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hey, I'm just kind of thinking, Tom, what are all these people, all these Trumpers, they go to these rallies, they get all excited about stuff, and they're all, they had their rally, they had their fight there on January 6th and all this stuff, but they're not looking further down the pipe. In other words, they want to clean out all the blacks and the Jewish people, which is, of course, not right. And what are they going to end up with? So you end up with, let's say, something like Hungary, but maybe worse. So what are they going to end up with? They're going to have taxes. They're not going to have Social Security. They're not going to have any health insurance that's sponsored by the government.
Right.
Or they're going to pay into programs.
Yeah, you're going to end up with
up?
authoritarianism and nothing. You're absolutely right, Jeff, and you know, it's a good thing to point out to them. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Thanks so much for being with us today. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. That includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.